for Ashley. Meeting Jason was a certain salvation. A dark, empty hole had been growing in her soul until that moment. The girl from a wealthy family had never known rejection. Her mother, a former Miss Universe, cared only about not losing the attention of men, and she, like a perpetual motion machine, made her run to fitness gyms, fashion salons, and beauticians. But she had little interest in her daughter. The father was much older than the mother, calm, attentive, and so dear, but all the time was at work. He paid attention, but it was not enough, and sometimes it even seemed like he was hiding from some of life's problems at work. Ashley always dressed better and had the best clothes. Teachers were a little wary of her. For this, she was disliked by her classmates. At university, studying became a salvation, and she liked everything around her. New friends and girlfriends appeared. First love, which was bitter and destructive, and she fell in love with the most attractive, handsome man. He was so good that next to this guy, her brain just seemed to shut off, and she realized that he was from a very rich, powerful family. He loved no one but himself, and he treated all of his ex-girlfriends with condescension and arrogance. He made fun of behind their backs. It was at that moment, when she didn't hear him discussing his ex-girlfriend, calling her obscene words, that she should have stopped and realized that she would become the next one. But she couldn't resist the animal passion. Ashley had always been noted for her intelligence and cleverness. Looking at her mother, who had only brands in her head, she tried to become completely different. She studied on her own. Graduated from high school with honors, but without a medal. At university, she immersed herself in her studies. She wanted to break stereotypes, to be not only beautiful, but also smart. The first beauty of the university, she was noticed by that handsome man and made another tick. If Ashley loved him with all her heart and soul, opened her welcoming arms for him, gave her purity and innocence, then for him she became the next check mark. As soon as he played with her, he just stopped communicating. I tried to meet, to call, but he did not respond. One day I saw him outside the university from the window. He was in an embrace with his classmate. It all made sense. Her subconscious was screaming to leave and not make a scene to preserve her dignity. But her emotions overwhelmed her. She approached, asked. Faced with an overwhelming amount of unpleasant words and ridicule, her heart bled, her soul emptied. After that, there was an emptiness. I couldn't concentrate on my studies. I couldn't seem to breathe. One day, walking in the park, in a state of complete apathy and detachment from reality, she sat on a bench, and there were trees all around, tranquility, the smell of pine trees. There was emptiness in her soul. There was pain in her heart. Even the fact that there was no one to tell, she didn't want to give her friends a reason to gossip. You couldn't tell your father. And her mother? She didn't want to say anything. She kept it all to herself, in her heart, in her soul. She seemed to be crumbling from the inside out. She hadn't slept much lately. Nothing interested her. She wanted to forget everything and start over, but she couldn't. You look very sad, she heard suddenly. She almost jumped on the bench. She turned and saw a good-looking man of about 25, staring at her with an easy and open smile. For some reason, his appearance inspired confidence. Although Ashley had always been feisty, this time she decided to just ignore it, turning away without answering anything. I wanted to cry. Don't be sad. You're so beautiful. He'll be fine, he said in a very soft, gentle, and confident voice. When she heard that, she calmed down. He turned away immediately, seeing that she didn't want to talk to him. Jason sighed sadly. He'd never met a girl like this before. But when he saw her on the bench in the park, he couldn't pass her by. And so delicate, refined, exquisite, but with sad, empty eyes. He knew that look, a look of hopelessness and indifference. Then what was her problem? Beautifully dressed, obviously from a wealthy family, so everything can be changed. Why the incredible sadness? He wanted something to help. And what he'd do. After all, sometimes a few nice, friendly words can help a person to return to the true path and overcome internal problems. It is with the help of conversation that psychologists save people. Yeah, I'm not having much fun, but that doesn't concern you. Mind your own business. And I wanted to say something to put him in his place. Ashley looked at him with a demeaning, haughty, cold stare. Yeah, that's right. No offense. Just wanted to help. He smiled in a very pleasant and friendly way. Ashley saw a rather handsome, athletic guy in front of her, probably looking for another victim, just like her ex. All men are the same. An unbearable ache reappeared in her soul. How could she hate them all? And I don't meet on the street, so don't try. It's not going to work, Ashley said with a little hatred in her voice and turned away. Oh, I'm sorry, I just wanted to do something to help. He stood up, picked up the cane that was beside him, and walked slowly, leaning on it. Ashley looked up at him, embarrassed. It was embarrassing. This guy, despite the fact that he was an invalid himself, tried to support her. She stood up and caught up with him. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's take a walk together, she smiled, and he smiled back at her. From that moment on, they met almost daily. At first, a strong friendship developed between them, trust in each other, mutual support. Jason was raised in an orphanage, was disabled, received an apartment from the state, to which Ashley came quite often, helped him clean, do laundry, buy groceries. Despite his disability, he worked online all the time, taking on any even difficult jobs. I'm doing my best, Ashley. I still have that balcony to fix. See? I'm almost done with the repairs, just a little bit more. If I could get married, they laughed. But Ashley really admired him. He was so strong. He worked out on the bar at home every day and had such an attractive, handsome, pumped-up body. So the friendship had been a real lifesaver for her. Even the anger, the hatred she felt for her ex just went away. It was like she was cleansed of all the negativity. She became free. She realized that when you overcome such moments, you become stronger and wiser. And if what happened to her hadn't happened, maybe she never would have met Jason. And he had become so close to her, such a dear, close friend, a best friend, someone she could tell everything to. It's really cozy here. When I come to you, I feel like I'm finally home, where I'm welcome, where it's warm. She rolled her eyes dreamily. I'm glad. He looked at her with sadness and boundless love. He was philosophical about life. He understood that it was difficult for the poor to get through. He knew that physical limitations imposed their imprint on life. But despite this, he aspired and dreamed. I knew that anything was possible if you wanted it bad enough. But as soon as he saw Ashley on the bench, he immediately knew she was perfect. His heart pounded harder. But there was no chance. And even now that they were best friends, he realized he couldn't give her anything good. But she came from a rich family, a girl who had everything one could dream of. And what was he? That's nothing. Just a small detail in the workings of the capitalist machine. His life, his destiny, is a game of cards. And if you're lucky, you'll be happy. If you're unlucky, there's nothing you can do to build your world. So what are you thinking? Ashley was looking at him very carefully. I guess I'm thinking that I love you, but I can't give you anything with my love. Only care. He decided to tell the truth for some reason. Ashley raised her eyebrows in surprise, but in truth she'd known for a long time that Jason loved her. She felt something for him, too, but there was a limiter inside that warned her not to make any hasty decisions. She'd cleverly reduced the conversation to a friendly love affair, but she realized that it was about something more sublime. She had not yet fully realized her feelings, but she felt incredibly comfortable with him. She could confide all her secrets. She consulted him, and often stayed with him. But most importantly, he had never, until that day, hinted at bed or any personal relationship. Everything was somehow in itself sincere, pure, and incredibly open. And I guess that's what true love is. There was no crazy passion, which was replaced by pain and disappointment. There was stability, openness, complete trust. Before she left for home, Ashley looked at him one more time. Amazing, so gentle and beautiful, with crazy red hair like a carrot, mustache and glasses and green eyes, kind and bottomless, and so smiling, so unnatural in these modern times. If he'd born a woman, he'd be worth nothing with such looks. But he was born inexplicably, where inexplicably by whom he was brought up by the state. Aha, he was immersed in a world of temptation, where he could only exist, and incredibly strong, though having a disability, something with his leg, having hope of recovery. Since an expensive surgery could make him whole, but having no real possibility, the guy was not discouraged, struggled and lived. created his paradise hut in the hope that someday he would bring his beloved here. Courageous, despite the fact that most of his time was spent at the computer, doing something, learning programming. He started every morning with exercise. There was no passion between them, but there was something stronger. Ashley decided to set the table at his place on her birthday and spend the holiday for the first time with someone who was truly family to her. And every year until her 4th year, she had gone home on this day. "It's going to be okay," he said. And the girl absolutely understood what he was thinking. Their future would be difficult. It would be hard to give up everything she had previously considered basic needs. But branded clothes, expensive cosmetics, various jewelry, this is not happiness, not life. She will never be like her mother. Alex Adamson's indifferent, soulless father. A respected businessman who was rarely at home and saw no emotion from his wife. The mother was indifferent to anything that didn't have a brand or label on it. The father was nothing but a huge wallet. This, however, did not make the man suffer at all. There was like an unspoken agreement between them, whereby he was rich and Ashley was beautiful. At any events, they transformed into a couple in love, played masterfully, and at home just scattered into different rooms. No scandals, no emotions. A family reunion even sounds awful. Think back on it all. Ashley wrinkled her nose. Maybe not going, but she missed her dad a lot. "I have a great dad." Ashley looked at Jason. "He'll be sure to introduce you," he smiled. "Sure," he said. "I'll miss you, so call and write more often." "Deal." Ashley couldn't sleep for a long time. She kind of wanted to go home. She really missed her dad. She hadn't seen him much before, but he had always been a true friend to her. So she realized that he would understand and say, "Press forward." And now she had a loved one who was even closer than her dad. So how would her father feel about her chosen one? Never talked to him about this future, about her marriage. But most likely he will not be happy about a son-in-law with no family and tribe, no money. Her father was her friend, but he was a hard, harsh, and cruel man. So it was hard to imagine his rebel man. He needed to be prepared for it. Ashley didn't want to leave Jason. She needed to be there for him, and some inner feeling in her gut told her that he was always on the verge of fighting for life and wanting to die. That even though outwardly he was incredibly positive, strong, and determined, Ashley knew that wasn't always the case. At night, often stroking his arms, marred with scars, small scars, and some were very old, others more recent. How many times had this man, who had no goals, no family, and knew no love, picked up a blade, lay down in a hot bath, and slashed the past, trying to rid himself of the feeling of being unwanted and reconnect with the universe? Why did this man feel like a stranger in life? A lot of things became clear to her after seeing those scars. There was no point in his life to make it up on his own, to continue his path and to nip himself, to make repairs to the apartment, to master programming, to finish the repair. That is it okay to leave him for a whole month? Yes, you can. He loves, he will wait. Everything will be fine. Everything will be exactly as it should be. He's responsible not only for his own life, but for hers. And so he's not likely to do anything stupid. In the morning, Jason just walked her out, trying not to think about being alone again. And when you left him, his mother just brought him to the orphanage and then had her parental rights terminated. He said he tried to find her, searching through every thread he could find, but he couldn't find her. He was about 7 or 8 years old when his mother brought him in and gave him away herself. I remember her crazy red hair, her green fox eyes, the huge scar on her left cheek. Jason continued, eyes full of grief and hopelessness. She told him then that she loved him, but that she couldn't be a good mother girl, and said she was the reason he was now disabled, and because of her, he had no chance for a future. Maybe life will be gracious and you can accomplish a lot. Maybe someone will take you in and you'll have a future, but not with me, she was saying. So large tears flowed from his mother Alice's eyes as he saw that picture again now. It's beautiful, eye-catching, but tired and unhappy mommy. I'll work. We'll get through this. I'll always be there for you, she said. He didn't understand much at the time, but he knew for sure that he wanted to be by her side. He loved his mother with all his heart. Son, remember me. She said, wiped off from her neck, a very thin chain with a small pendant that looked like a lady daisy, 8-petaled. Don't give it to anyone. It's a picture of you and me. It was a gift from your grandmother, and I've done so many stupid things. I don't belong on this earth. I love you. Remember that always. Always have and always will. Mommy, he snuggled up to her with his whole body, smelled the warm scent of steamed milk and cheap perfume with a hint of pine scent. It was a scent he could sort of smell now. Mommy, all these thoughts made him indescribably sad. Honey, I'll be right back, she said. Ashley didn't love her chosen one. She wanted to take him with her, but she knew it was premature. "Okay, call more often," she bade, he said. He hugged her again, as he had as a child, breathing in her scent. The scent of the woman he loved. The smell was incredibly delicate and pleasant, delightful. He could smell the delicate notes of lilac. So it seemed that the scent of the woman he loved had completely displaced the scent of his beloved mother from his memory. Arriving home, Ashley immediately met her mother. "Oh my God, my darling." Her mother rushed over to hug and kiss her. "You've grown up in these 6 months." The pretty girl began to look at Ashley. Mommy didn't miss her. She snuggled up to her, but felt a certain detachment. "Honey, do you remember when I bought you that dress?" She adjusted her yellow, impossibly gorgeous outfit. "Tell me how you, Olivia, looking at your daughter, saw your little mere replica. She seems nice, but she's gray. We should buy her a good groom. Like she bought any toy she wanted." "It's okay, Mom, the session's over. Everything's fine. My daughter put the coffee on the bar. Do you want coffee?" "It's not healthy. I only drink fresh juice." But she gave her a disdainful look. "Don't you ever go to the hairdresser?" It always amazed Ashley that her mother somehow didn't care about her emotions, her spirituality. The only thing Olivia cared about was appearance and beauty. And now her own daughter, who hadn't been around for more than 6 months, whose eyes were shining with mad love, was getting attention only in the matter of her hair. It even became kind of unpleasant. Of course it's important. A woman must always remain a woman, beautiful, well-groomed, gorgeous, so otherwise men will not love. I looked proudly at Matsid, reflection in the huge refrigerator. "Does your father love you?" asked the daughter with a challenge. "Perhaps he doesn't love me, but he appreciates and respects me," the mother said with a little sadness in her voice. "Love, my dear, is not the most important thing in a relationship. Have you ever been in love?" But you really wondered, Mother is so cold. Has she ever had love? He did. She sat down at the table. "Let's have some coffee." She got sad. "Thought you don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Ashley felt her mother's pain and immediately felt sorry for her. "You loved your father with all my heart, Alex Sergei. He was so attentive and gentle. He wooed you so beautifully. I loved him. I was just like you. Naive, pure, not without the fact that you wouldn't date a poor man. But it wasn't just money. He wasn't so rich then, moderately wealthy." Ashley set a nice, small sugar cup on the table. "No, thank you." She tried to make the atmosphere more pleasant, and it was sugar. The girl put her cup on the table and began to stir. "Your father was so well looked after. I fell in love with him, and he never loved me. He had the only love of his life, some hippie. He still has her picture," my mother sighed sadly again. "I found out when I was pregnant with you, and I thought, it's no big deal. I'll be able to break him. She'll love me." She was smart. "You won't believe it. I learned to be an actress, never cross him. And he pretended to love me, but then he started to drift away." "Mom, you cannot tell me if you do not want to." Daughter did not want to rake up the past. "No, I'll tell you. He stopped coming to my bedroom, and at night he sat in the study until morning. I came in once, and he was asleep on the desk where her pictures were. We haven't lived as husband and wife for a London. That's the only joy, shopping and beauty, sasti, popping and beauty and all that." Just like that, it all became obvious to Ashley. We'd really just become indifferent thing, and it was all Dad's fault. It was horrible to imagine that Mom loved him sincerely and honestly, She loved no one. For the first time, her daughter saw her with tears in her eyes, sincere tears. Father, but he loved too, loved but another. How terrible it is to live and know that your favorite person does not reciprocate you, or doesn't love you, doesn't appreciate you, just uses you as a social element. It brought Jason to mind. Honey, how much did you miss him? But why don't you leave your father? You're so beautiful. You'll find love. She truly felt sorry for her mother. You may not believe me, but I still love him. I don't mean to look indifferent, but I do. I still have hope in my heart. Mommy, calm down. Her daughter hugged her, talked to him. No, and don't tell him anything. Why didn't Ashley always think that all family problems were because people couldn't be honest with each other? It doesn't make sense. She's long since made her peace with it, and it's unlikely that anything will change. Then was open and frank for the first time in the last 20 years. All this time she'd been playing a role as a careless person, fascinated only by appearances. It was once a game, but in time it became routine. Maybe, but I think it's still worth talking about. Ashley said what she thought. She knew that openness and honesty could be the answer to anything. She could see that her mother truly loved her father, so she thought that attitude could be reanimated. Dan was greatly distressed by the memories, so Ashley did not talk about the difficulties she had with her loved one. Ashley wanted to start living with Jason, but she realized that it was important to talk to her father about the relationship, and she needed to get his blessing, and doing that wasn't going to be as easy as it seemed. And her father seemed to always be on her side, but the truth was, if she told him about Jason being disabled and from an orphanage, there was a good chance her father wouldn't accept her choice. And that wasn't even what scared her. She realized that she would be able to finish her studies, and then she would have studies, and then she would work full-time and cope with any difficulties. But she wasn't counting on her father's money, but she was afraid that he'd start pushing her around and maybe bring Jason back. But Ashley wanted to make him happy, and in no way wanted to be a source of trouble for him. Dad came home from work in the evening. My princess, how happy am I to see you? And the emotional connection with his daughter was very great. No one in his life he loved as much as he loved her. He worried that the little girl's future would be cloudless, without problems. That's why he worked and tried, put everything aside for her sake. Daddy, she threw herself around his neck and sank into a soft but confident embrace. How good of you to come. Why didn't you say it was today? I would have met you yesterday. He shifted his eyebrows theatrically and made a stern look. I wanted to surprise you. His daughter looked at him with eyes full of delight. Daddy always knew how to look gorgeous. Ashley realized now that he must have had 1,000,000 girls running after him, and he didn't like his mother. I wonder what was the one he loved, the one who had conquered his mind for years. Well, maybe Mom is wrong, and he just keeps some resentment on his soul. So they have no real family, but just a visual deception. Surprise Mom, he said with a certain monotony. Yeah, she and I already had coffee. What did you look like? Is he gorgeous? But the eyes are sad. Ashley had always been able by some subconscious, inexplicable instinct to see his troubles. Right now the visibility was without unrest, but the unrest was inside him. Yeah, some difficulties at work, but that's all minor stuff, as usual. How are your studies? In peaceful conversations they met the evening. Then the family sat down to dinner. Everything was as it always was, perfect, as if her parents had rehearsed dinner or breakfast in the evenings. No bickering, no complaints. Artificial smiles, honey, just like in the best movies. And if an outsider got here, at this ordinary dinner table, they would probably think of the perfect family in front of them. And Ashley was the only one who knew it was a game. Now she found out that her mother was not a soulless doll, but a normal and adequate woman who would put on a mask because of her inner pain and disappointment in love. For several days, Ashley did not dare to talk to her father. The situation irritated her. Mary, you may be dismissed. Get some rest, I'll take care of Daddy. Ashley smiled at her favorite housekeeper, who had always been like a grandmother to Quamper. Okay, dear, she asked her host again. Alex Adamson, can I go now? Well, of course. If the daughter wants to take care of her father, so be it. He smiled, then bon appetit. Mary Johnson dutifully checked everything on the table and left. Meanwhile, Ashley and his father were enjoying the stew, which was delicious and flavorful. As soon as the housekeeper left, Ashley decided to start the conversation. "Dad, tell me, have you ever really loved someone?" She tried to speak nonchalantly to make her block sound pleasant. A shadow of inner disappointment ran across his face. A sadness appeared in his eyes. "You don't have to say anything if you want to." Ashley hoped that he, like her mother, would be frank with her. What was the point of this conversation? He looked at her carefully and shrewdly. "I'm in love," she paused tragically. "Good. And who is the lucky man?" Father said with surprise. His little princess had grown up and become an adult. The father looked at her carefully and penetratingly, all grown up. "He will have to part with her. She will live in another house." "Well, I'll introduce you, of course. First I faced betrayal, and he supported me, became my best friend, then my favorite person. I can't imagine living without him. Jason's a wonderful man," Ashley said at length, describing everything in the best colors and tones. But most importantly, she left out the information about her lover's disability and lack of a steady job. Her father looked at her too harshly and strictly, but her words touched the man's soul. He remembered his only love, a beautiful American woman with red hair, bright eyes, and gentle hands. "Can you hear me?" Ashley noticed that the man's thoughts were somewhere far away. He'd remembered his life. "Can you tell me so romantically that it brought back memories of my love?" He lowered his eyes, tears seeming to well up in them. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Ashley knew the answer, but she wanted to hear the story from him. "Your mom is someone I respect a lot. She's perfect, but I loved someone else so much." He decided to answer his say daughter with honesty on honesty. "And who?" The girl tried to make an interested look. "As soon as I started doing business, I met her. Very beautiful, but attracted in her another thing. But she was lively, so free in everything. We started seeing each other. I found out she had a kid, but it didn't scare me. Everything was so cool and romantic, and she was special. But as soon as I asked her to move in with me, she ran away. I looked for her afterward, but just like that, I got a bottle. You want some good wine?" "Yeah." Ashley didn't want wine. She wanted to talk, make her father soften up. Then maybe it would be okay to talk about everything. He heard a lot about her, but no facts, she said with a heavy sigh. "Father, you never saw each other again?" "No, I met your mom a year later. Got married, but it's hard to forget Ashley. Life was kind of colorful, different. When she left, there was an emptiness. Everything faded." He took a gulp of wine. "I see my mother was right about my father torturing her instead of loving her," Ashley thought. "And you know when colors came back into my life?" He looked questioningly at his daughter. "When you were born, you were my salvation in life, became bright again. So that's the way Mom and I live our lives. Everything is good with us. You have opportunities now. Don't you want to find your love?" It was really incomprehensible to her daughter why her parents were not divorcing, but torturing each other. "No, not anymore. I have a family," the father said confidently. "But a family is not a sentence. Why are you tormenting Mom?" She looked at him with eyes full of hatred. "Yes, your mother is well off. She never thinks about anything but money. Though I think she once loved me," my father almost shouted. "Loved and loves." Ashley jumped up. "She's become like that because of you, the one who loved you so much. Dedicated poems to me." He drank the wine again in a gulp. "What makes you think Mom doesn't love you?" Ashley toned it down a little. "I don't. It's just the way it seemed to me. Mom told me herself that she did and does, and knew you loved someone else and suffered." Ashley stammered, for she had promised her mother not to tell. Her voice trembled. Her father stared very intently. "Interesting. You surprised me. I thought she was indifferent." After this conversation, Father remembered the past. That love with whom there was no equal that made him unhappy. She didn't conquer him with her beauty, but with something else. She wrote him poems that told of true love, so she was a free bird. She didn't want to depend on him. He lied to his daughter without telling the truth, and they lived together. She had a baby boy Alex wanted to adopt. He was willing to work around the clock for her. and she needed attention. She often went off without telling him where she was going, leaving the baby unattended. He'd freak out, scream, and she'd sit and watch him. The first time they were madly passionate. They did what they wanted. He'd rush home to her from work faster. Then he started staying out longer. She got other men, and he got jealous. One day he saw her with another. They were just talking, but when they got home, Alex was furious, insulting, humiliating, threatening to take the baby away. After that, she was gone in the morning. No belongings, left heartbroken. He looked for her. She was living with another man, demanding nothing, but incredibly violent. He beat her. She ran away. Where to? Unknown. He searched for her for a long time, but to no avail. He wanted to prove to himself and to her that if she came back, he'd made a mistake. So I married Olivia. She was delicate, tender, vulnerable. But later on, she became more daring. He remembered the moment that split their lives apart. After the birth, she came into the office. "Who is this woman, Alex?" She looked up with eyes full of tears. "Your beloved," he said with defiance. "What about me, your spouse?" She looked with sadness and hope. "And what about you? Don't you have enough money?" "But you don't have enough Miss Universes." He did not believe in her love. "But hear me, you will never be loved by me again. Money is money." And she walked away with her head held proudly high. Always perfect in public, she conjured up the image of a perfect family. She was surprised. This evening had come as a surprise to him. Taneka, his daughter, the little girl who had kept the fire of life burning in him, was now an adult and would soon be married. Who is this man? Can he make Ashley happy? Just questions. We'd have to get to know each other. And he really hoped that his daughter's chosen one loved her, not the money she had. After all, that happens quite a lot these days. He hoped that his daughter would be happy and not, like him, gaze expectantly at the women passing by, hoping to see the one. He pulled out the pictures. The red-haired girl looked up at him coquettishly from the snapshot as he began to go through the family photos. Olivia was everywhere in them, happy, with a beautiful smile, the happiest possible image. He really thought his spouse was happy with the unlimited limit card she was using, and it turned out that she loved and suffered. Is that so? If the wife has been suffering all this time, living her pain, then maybe it's not too late to change everything. Yet he'd already lost the woman he loved because of his pride. And Olivia, a friend of his 4 decades, always uncomplaining, always near, ready to come to the rescue. So maybe he should try again? But now to meet his daughter's fiancé first. Ashley said she'd get together with him, try to live together. That's what was necessary to get to know his future in-laws. Something inside him told him that his daughter wasn't telling him something, and something out there was clearly wrong. "Hey, Olivia." The secretary entered the office where he was sitting in his thoughts. "I was wondering, do we have any meetings or events next week? I need to make plans." She came in every Sunday, asking such questions, and then she would plan everything properly and efficiently. "No, Olivia." He looked at her extremely carefully. "Can you stay?" Olivia looked surprised, but stopped, closed the door, walked gracefully to the couch, and sat down. He got up and walked over to her and sat down beside her. "Have you really loved me all these years and waited for the attention I didn't give you? Listened to me in a businesslike manner with complete indifference?" he asked his wife. "Do you know your daughter wants to get married?" She said she was in love, but to get married. Olivia was really surprised. "Yes, she wants to live with him together from next semester." He sat even closer. "What do you think?" "I think if she loves him, let her try. If it's love, they'll live together no matter what. And if it's not, they'll be divorced quickly," Olivia said wisely. "God, she's beautiful, resilient, wise. Why have I never looked at her as a real woman? Always thought she was mercantile from day one, because she was just convenient. And now my daughter has suddenly opened my eyes," he thought. "What has this woman done? Why have I tormented her for years, neglecting her and replacing it with money? It's not Olivia's fault that I lost my first love, and then made up my own misery, making her suffer as well." He didn't know how he should start the conversation. Yes, it was all amazing, with his wife, Everything was always discussed dryly and specifically, like in the office. "Do you believe that she fell in love? Could there be such a thing?" he asked, and Olivia looked at him with etymologies full of wonder. "Did you love me?" he asked in almost a whisper. Olivia was even more surprised, staring and not understanding. "I did," she lowered her eyes. And now the man was looking at her penetratingly. Olivia lowered her head and looked away. Gently, he turned her toward him and looked into her eyes. "Say yes, but I realized it when you said you loved and would love someone else all the time," she said, tears welling up in her voice. "My darling. Let's try it all over again." He drew her to him and hugged her. Why, she did not understand the changes that had happened to her husband. To be happy, from that day their relationship became completely different. It was as if their feelings had sharpened. They had really decided to make a fresh start. Not a fresh start, but a fresh start. Olivia really had become an incredibly happy woman. She had a man by her side who surrounded her with care and attention that she had never, in fact, known. So when her daughter left, she was insanely happy for her parents, realizing that she had a hand in it. And she knew that without her, they would not have started a new phase of their lives, would not have built a new relationship. Her father promised that very soon he would come to meet his future son-in-law. Naturally, Ashley was not very much afraid, but at the same time she realized that without it, it would be impossible to build a future with her chosen one. Ashley worried that there might be difficulties in the relationship between her father and Jason. After all, they were so different. Dad clearly knew what he was aiming for. He was always tough. Jason was completely different, soft, gentle, vulnerable. She felt sorry that these two completely different people would have to communicate. They might have a hard time building a relationship. Arriving in town, Ashley went straight to Jason's house. "I missed you so much. I feel like we haven't seen each other in forever." She hugged him and wouldn't let go. It seemed to Ashley that if she let him go, he would disappear. There was a calmness in her soul right now around this man. She truly loved him. It was hard without him. When she saw him, she just couldn't tear herself away, hugging and kissing the one person she wanted to be open and real with. "But how was your trip?" He smiled gently and hugged her tightly. It was great. Her trip had had incredible results, but her parents had reconciled, or rather, had become close to each other. The only thing she didn't want to talk about was talking to her father about how she'd never really told him anything about Jason. "That's fine. Come see my present." It was amazing how this man, who'd been a stranger 6 months ago, could sense her mood. And she didn't want to talk about the conversation with her father, but he didn't ask. It was like a gut feeling. That was it a gift. She was well aware that he didn't have much money and wouldn't be able to satisfy her wishes. Ashley had long ago decided that she didn't need valuables, rich gifts. She only needed his love, sincere love, and someone in life. With the help of parents, money seeks power and fame. But she didn't need anything, just him around. "I wonder what you want to give me. Are you going to treat me to something? But let's go look," she said, leaning on her wand. He took her hand and led her to the garage, opened the door, and before her stood a magnificent vintage, luxurious, rare chair, beautifully restored. Fantastic. She adored things like this. It seemed that the Queen's maid of honor had once sat in this chair. It was amazing how this man had accomplished such a miracle with his own hands. It was most likely an antique chair, and he had restored it, cleaned it, made it beautiful, all for her once upon a time. But she used to tell him that she liked that sort of thing. Used to dream that when she had her own house, she'd buy a huge amount of stuff like this. And then she'd met Jason and realized that a lot of the things she used to dream about would never come true. I didn't want to tell him anything about the money. She knew he wouldn't be able to fulfill her desires, and so she shouldn't have made him feel inferior. And now she clearly realized that this close, kind-hearted person felt her very subtly. Even without money, he was trying to realize her dreams. The chair was delightful. She threw herself on his neck, hugged him, and shed tears. And he laughed. Realized they were tears of happiness. He didn't ask any stupid questions. He just smiled, hugged her, and kissed her crying eyes. So the days went by merrily and carefree. Ashley realized that very soon she would become a specialist, go to work. They could live a full, independent life. and she told him she was moving out, and a few days later she did move in. They formed a small but dignified family. Everyone supported and understood each other. He even helped her write her notes. And it was so tender and romantic that Ashley was just thrilled. The only thing that scared her over and over again was that she never told him ever again. And someday she would have to. One day there was a knock on the door. Ashley opened it. It was her father on the doorstep. She'd left the address with her mom just in case. Now she realized it was the wrong decision. She realized there was no other way her dad could have done it. He had just come unannounced, rushed over to talk and see everything with his own eyes. Dad was surprised and heartbroken. Ashley wasn't ready for such a conversation, much less a meeting. Neither was Jason. She was afraid that now Dad might hurt him, and things wouldn't go the way she had planned. They had had such a good life. Everything had been wonderful. And now it might all be ruined because of Dad, who, not understanding the situation, was bound to do something wrong. That would be a shame. Ashley's only hope was that Jason would understand her, that he would understand and forgive her for Dad. So yes, he loved her, would understand that she couldn't do otherwise, couldn't leave an address, which meant this situation was inevitable. You don't understand, are you surprised? But I decided to come and meet my son-in-law, take a look. How do you live here? Maybe you need some help. Without pausing, the father said. He realized that Ashley was in a certain stupor, but at the same time he couldn't take it anymore. Every day the thought lived in a corner that he had absolutely no idea who he had given his daughter to, who was now in charge of her life and her well-being. So he made a decision for himself to go and figure it all out. Olivia, of course, objected, but he always acted independently and decisively. While the cameraman had her a bag of groceries and started to slowly come around, Dad, we weren't expecting guests at all. Ashley said trite, meaningless phrases. She realized that there was nothing she could change, nothing to worry about. I bought everything to set the table. Her father walked into the kitchen, looked around, stunned. Poverty Khrushchevcha with thin walls, a complete lack of any comfort. In the kitchen, an old banished stove, no dishwasher, just a nightmarish environment that cannot be described in words. And he even felt like a rat was about to run through somewhere. Not because it's dirty, but because it's old, shabby, and miserable. Dad went into the living room. How can you call it a living room? A hall with shabby old carpets that come from the Soviet Union. It's a wonder they're still there. Is this really where his daughter lives? You couldn't tell from looking at her that she was unhappy. Smiling, cheerful, fresh. What's going on here? It's so disgusting, so horrible. It's impossible. One room that acted as a living room and a bedroom. Everything here was kind of frozen in time, old cabinets, an intimidating couch. But in the center of this terrifying room was a gorgeous vintage armchair. It was probably the only element here that wasn't disgusting. Where's my future son-in-law? Dad tried to hold back the nausea closing in on him. Went to the store, the daughter practically whispered. As she saw the look in the man's eyes, he realized what he was thinking. Realized something terrible was about to happen. Dad saw the jowls on his cheeks begin to run and the pulse gray on his neck. She realized he was about to explode, and with any luck, he'd be gone before Jason got there, which meant there would be no scandal. But if she was unlucky, the scandal would break when the future son-in-law came in fusion of her father. She was very afraid. But she was even more afraid of losing Jason. So she pulled herself together and looked at her dad with a stern, even stern look. Julie suddenly felt as if she were a small copy of him. She could feel the jowls on her cheeks and the veins in her neck throbbing. Go away, just go away. Her daughter said it, even with a slight tear in her voice. It seemed that she was about to start the scandal herself. Kick him out of here. Scream and never want to talk to him, scream. Her father turned to her in surprise, looking at her, not understanding how his little princess, delicate, refined, so exquisite, suddenly turned into a resident of a communal apartment, defending her square meters. It would have been a serious scandal if the door hadn't opened and Jason hadn't appeared on the doorstep. But he looked at the stranger who stood next to his beloved in surprise, and guessed it was her father, who always understood everything without words. Sort of sensed it with some inner, almost animal instinct. Good afternoon. And we have guests." He extended his hand to her father in a friendly manner. A little confused, Ashley introduced the two to each other. Despite the fact that her father actually turned pale, shook hands with his future son-in-law, looked at him disdainfully, and even disparagingly, took another look. Yes, handsome, athletic, pumped-up figure. But an invalid, standing leaning on a stick, Alex Adamson thought regretfully. It was awful. That is, his beautiful daughter Ashley, who had a huge dowry, unlimited financial opportunities, now lives with a disabled person in the shabby apartment of Khrushchev's time. And the world must have gone mad. It's probably just asleep. I need to pinch myself, wake up soon. But for Alex Adamson, everything was so terrible it seemed unreal. Seating her father with a table in the hall, Ashley surreptitiously began preparing the table with cheesy, old Soviet plates. Somewhere an open crystal vase she poured the salad into. It was all as if he was about to get into a time machine and travel back in time, but Dad held on. As everyone sat down at the table and drank some wine, he suddenly decided to have a final talk with his daughter. He realized that there was no point in stalling. He had to dot his I's and cross his T's. He didn't want to talk to Jason, though. Asked him where he worked. He said computer, so nowhere. And that finally convinced him that he needed to talk to him right now. There was no point in putting off such a serious complaint. His mind was screaming at him to stop, realized that now he could lose his daughter forever. His grievances were burning her soul, perhaps sowing a seed of hatred between father and daughter. But temper and some demon that had always been in him screamed, "That's it, say it. Get her out of here, make it right." "Come on, let's go out to the kitchen," he said, practically hissed. Okay, she didn't take Jason's hand. She could see that he'd gone pale. Sensed the storm coming. "It's going to be okay, honey. Honey, love you." Go in the kitchen. Dad wouldn't even sit on a stool. He looked at everything with eyes full of disgust. "What is all this, Ashley? What is this?" He couldn't hold back his emotions and he was talking loud enough. "I don't know what you're talking about." His daughter turned away from him, trying to make her voice quieter, as if to motivate him to lower the volume too. "I mean what this is all about. You live in this shabby crack house. There's no living space, nothing to attract you. And this man is cute, yes, but he's disabled. Do you realize that he makes absolutely no money? How are you going to live?" He hesitated more and more with each passing second. This is a man. Is this a man who lives in this shabby room and brought his favorite woman here? The walls in the flats were very thin, so Jason could hear everything. It wasn't pleasant, but he understood why her father was so upset. He probably wouldn't have been thrilled if he were him either, but he also realized that he was precious to Ashley. And he realized that money wasn't the most important thing in life. He didn't want to listen to all that was going on in the kitchen anymore. He started pacing the room, but it was impossible not to hear what was going on in there, and he wanted to come in to say his manly word. And then he realized that all this was meaningless, and it was better to keep silent now. Then his father would leave, and they'd go back to their normal, peaceful lives. Ashley and his father might not talk for a while, but then they would reconcile. Everything will be fine. Her father will eventually accept the situation, or perhaps someday she herself will realize that her father was telling the truth and will leave Jason because of worry and inner discomfort. He walked around the room, picking up the souvenirs that were on the shelf and moving them from place to place, as well as his guitar, then decided to just play and sing a song so he couldn't hear what was going on in the kitchen. In fact, to create a background noise. I ran my thin fingers over the guitar strings and then sang. Dad went pale. Ashley thought his lips quivered. Jason played and sang, and her father changed before her eyes. "How do you know that song?" He was practically screaming. "My mother used to sing it to me," Jason said, surprised but confident, unable to understand what was happening. "You're from the orphanage." His father seemed to be losing his mind. "And she gave me away when I was 7 or 8. He couldn't hide his surprise. "What was her name?" Ashley's father asked, sitting down on the couch. "Alice." "Is she alive?" "I don't know." And that was how fate had brought him to a state where there was an opportunity to correct his mistakes of youth. And this was the same baby he had once rocked in his arms, the son of his only beloved woman, the one he idolized, the one who had made him happy, showed him a whole other vibrant life. He looked at her and realized that the red hair, the green eyes were like Ashley's now more than ever. Another time he realized he'd made a mistake. He shouldn't have meddled in his daughter's personal life, and they were happy after all. And maybe that's how happy he would have been with Alice. Together they must have overcome everything. But his insolence, his total control, had changed everything. She left, and then he wandered the world, never able to raise his only child in love and unity. So what can he do to honor his former love? For the woman who made him happy and essentially created him as he is now. It is to give his daughter and son the opportunity to be happy. When he heard the first lines of the song, he realized that these were the very poems his beloved had written to him, poems he remembered all his life. From that moment on, Alex Adamson became more attentive to people and decided to be home more with his wife. By appointing an executive and director in his firm, Gabe his daughter and son-in-law, who quickly won his heart with his good nature, a house where everything was perfect, told the young ones about his love, talked to Jason a lot about his mother, whom he hardly knew, or showed the photos he'd saved, which he gave away. Jason and Ashley were building their carefree, happy future in their new home. His father paid for the surgery to fix his chromosome and allowed him to run the company website, which allowed him to accompany webtional clients. And Olivia gained more than just a loved one who finally paid attention to her and showered her with love. So Mary Johnson was preparing to become a mother again, like a perfectly normal baby. But soon the mother began to notice some oddities in her behavior. "Jason, it seems that our tiny girl does not respond to toys at all," Emily said worriedly. "What are you saying?" "My husband couldn't believe it. Look, I show her the rattle, and she turns her head." "Yes, because it rings. Show her this pink horse, for example," the wife suggested. Jason swung the big plush horse from side to side over the crib, where the baby in the adorable yellow jumpsuit lay. Tiny waved her arms. "See, she's waving her hands. She wants to take the horse," said the father. "Do you want to take the horse, little Chloe?" "She's just waving her hands, not reaching for the toy." Emily shook her head. She didn't even look or move her head. Maybe the toy is too big and she's scared of it. Let's try something else. Jason went to the closet and picked up a small red teddy bear. He went back to his daughter's crib and began to show her the toy again. "It's really not responding, is it?" He frowned. "That's what I'm talking about," Emily nodded. "She used to stare at the musical carousel above the crib, and I thought she was following it with her eyes. But as it turned out, she was just listening to the music. When I was spinning the merry-go-round by hand, I never once noticed Chloe fixing her gaze on it. Maybe she's too young." Jason wouldn't give up. "No, honey. I see how other kids her age react. I'm afraid there's something wrong. I'm very afraid it's autism. I'll have her seen by a doctor tomorrow." "Don't worry, dear. If there was anything wrong, they would have told you at the hospital." "You're wrong. They don't notice everything in the hospital. Some abnormalities show up later. Didn't the pediatrician notice anything at the appointments?" "No, he did not say anything," surprised the worried father. "Only measured weight, temperature, asked about sleep and stool. So we should go to another doctor, to a better specialist." So Emily went. The next day she put the baby in her car seat and took her to the doctor. She couldn't wait to allay her fears. Fate couldn't have laughed so cruelly at them after so much anticipation and preparation for the baby. However, the doctor did not reassure Emily, but referred her to an ophthalmologist. The young mother left the office in tears. How could it be? How could it happen that her little girl was born completely blind? How is it that even alcoholics give birth to healthy children? She asked the doctor through her tears. And me, who so carefully prepared for pregnancy, followed all the recommendations: do not drink, do not smoke, breathe fresh air away from cars, even refused coffee. I am an avid coffee drinker, tried not to take the phone extra times, sat at the computer for a maximum of half an hour a day, if absolutely necessary. How was my child born blind? The doctor looked at Emily sympathetically and shook his head. You had absolutely nothing to do with it. It's something genetic, perhaps even from your husband. But you're wrong about the children of alcoholics. If they seem healthy to you, believe me, they actually have a host of problems, mental and physical. Personally, when a patient comes to me, I can tell by the look on their face if the mother drank during pregnancy. But you have done everything possible for your child, and I am sure you will do even more. Now or other times, and a blind child can adapt in society, become a full member of it. I'm sure everything can still be fixed, Emily insisted. I'll take her to the best specialists. That's the right thing to do, said the doctor. We should knock on every door. But Emily realized from the look on his face that she had no chance. Nevertheless, the caring mother began taking her to all the specialists she could find. Jason, who could not come to his senses for a long time after the news of the terrible diagnosis, spared no effort and money for trips to doctors. However, everything was in vain. Chloe was hopelessly blind. It took a long time for the couple to accept the inevitable. Their child is an invalid. They went through all the stages of accepting their situation. First anger, then denial. Then they tried to bargain with fate, with doctors, and even with God. And then they just accepted the fact that little Chloe would never see. Doctor, can the baby see anything? Emily asked the doctor one day. Unfortunately, nothing. The doctor shook his head. So she's doomed to eternal darkness. Close one eye with your hand and keep the other one open. Emily obeyed. Now try to see something. No matter how hard Emily tried, she saw nothing, no darkness or anything else. That's how your daughter sees the world. I mean, she doesn't see it at all. This information frightened Emily at first, but then she felt better. When she closed both eyes and saw the darkness, in which every now and then flashed some incomprehensible figures and images, she felt a little creepy that her daughter could see all these strange phenomena. But if she sees absolutely nothing, perhaps it is even better. Nothing will scare her, especially while she's still small and doesn't understand much. Yes, perhaps it's better to see nothing than darkness. When Emily realized that she couldn't make her daughter sighted, she decided to do her best to adapt her to her environment and make her as independent as possible. Jason was glad that his wife had finally gotten out of her depression and stopped beating herself up over what had happened. He worked hard so that his wife and daughter had enough money to attend special teachers who helped Chloe to adapt to life without one of the 5 most important human senses. Under the guidance of teachers, the spouses even equipped a sports room for the girl, where she could safely run, jump, climb. Emily was happy to note how the girl was moving more and more freely in space each time. And sometimes it even seemed that she was sighted. Over time, the little girl explored not only the sports room, but the entire apartment. She could even run around the common room, run out into the corridor, into the kitchen, and never once fell. "Wow, you've got some nimble moves," girl Jason said. "I thought I was going to have to buy a guide dog." And then, turning to his wife, he added, "Emily, this is all you're doing." Emily smiled back and kissed her husband. She was pleased that he appreciates her efforts, because she really tried hard, even singing career abandoned. Although her husband suggested that she record a CD and offer it to the radio, Emily played the guitar very well and sang beautifully. It was thanks to her talent that she met Jason. At one of the parties, she picked up her guitar and sang. When she finished, Jason came up to her and introduced himself as a producer and said that he saw her as a big star and would love to work with her. Emily couldn't believe that Jason was a producer. He looked more like a backyard bully. But it turned out that looks are deceiving, and by the time they met, The young man had worked as an agent for a couple of forgotten celebrities. At first, he and Emily tried to promote, but the girl soon realized that publicity is not for her. In addition, at the beginning of the way, she had to be hypocritical, smiling at those with whom she did not even want to say hello. There were a lot of lies and falsehoods. Emily decided to sing for herself, not in a hurry to record an album with songs of her own authorship. And then whatever would happen. But after the birth of her sick child, she had to give up singing. But Jason's business was going uphill. Yes, so much so that he even intended to get rid of the old parental apartment and build a house. Husband and wife often dreamed about how happy they would be together in the house. But things were pretty slow, and by the time Chloe was 7 years old, there was only a box on the lot. "It's okay. I'll do what I said I'd do. We'll get the house finished," Jason said, and Emily nodded, smiling. She didn't like to rush things, to push, to let things take their course. They had money for vacations at the best resorts, beautiful clothes, a car each, delicious food, pleasant leisure. A woman did not have to complain, especially she could not work and fully devote herself to her family and daughter. And Chloe and Emily were inseparable. The young mother liked to say that she gave birth to a girlfriend. Despite her blindness, the girl was active, well-read, and very bright. In her 7 years, she could play the piano and sang marvelously, singing talent inherited from her mother. Emily enjoyed listening to her daughter's melodious voice, and despite the fact that her own talent dusted on the shelf as an unreleased record, she felt that she had no reason to complain. The only thing she wished her husband was home more often. As Jason's career progressed, he was less and less likely to be seen with his family. He missed them a lot, but there was nothing he could do about it. Of course, he called. Always wondered how his girls were doing. But more and more often it happened, so that even the new year and March 8th, Emily and Chloe celebrated separately from the head of the family. At first, the young wife was very upset, and the little daughter also missed her daddy. But eventually Emily came to terms with the fact that for her husband is important self-fulfillment and good earnings. After all, he tried for the family and was very tired. However, as time went on, Emily began to notice that her husband was missing not only because of his work. He always had some parties, all kinds of business meetings and dinners. In addition, he traveled with artists on tour. As a result, he could not see his wife and daughter for weeks. The woman sadly realized that they ceased to be in the first place for the main man in their lives. Sure, Jason always arrived with flowers for his wife and toys for his daughter, but Emily felt it was more of a payoff than a gift from the heart. The more successful the producer became, and the more money he had, the cooler he treated the family. It wasn't uncommon for him to arrive drunk with some rowdy friends. Emily would smile at the guests, set the table for them, then clean up after them. The parties often ended in broken dishes and a mess in the house, and each time she felt more and more like her life was going downhill. The only salvation, an outlet for the unhappy wife, was a guitar. It was a very special guitar, very beautiful, snow white. Jason bought it for Emily when Chloe was not even in the project. He hadn't made much money then, and buying a musical instrument had put a serious hole in his budget. You could say that he spent every penny on it. But he knew that Emily played the guitar beautifully and sang romances divinely. Emily treasured this guitar, always very carefully treated it. When she and Chloe became sad, the woman took the snow-white instrument and gently strummed the strings. Sometimes she just played a musical composition, but more often she sang. The blind girl listened to her mother's voice with a smile, swaying to the beat, and sometimes even singing along. "Jason, you don't even ask how Chloe is doing," Emily reproached her husband, when he, returning after another business trip, almost from the doorstep began to tell about the success of the next concert and about the money he earned. He talked and talked. Emily realized that she was getting to know her husband, that he was not the same as he had been before. She realized that she didn't need all that money at all, but she wanted to hug Jason, the old Jason she had come to love. He was soft, warm. The kind man who wore a roomy t-shirt and old worn jeans. He could wear the same jacket for years, but he could buy expensive perfume for his wife or theater tickets. He could eat pasta for a month and then go on a second honeymoon. The old Jason was a little crazy, but this one's not. He's always focused and focused. He dresses smart. He's sharp-tongued. It's so unfair that people change in marriage. You marry one, and he suddenly gives you a surprise in the form of an unexpectedly changed character. You need to sign a contract at the time of marriage so that the person remains the same as the moment he or she puts his or her signature. And no surprises. Otherwise, you have to live with a complete stranger, and it can completely ruin your life. When Emily reproached Jason for his lack of attention to his daughter, the man was very indignant. He began to give a lot of arguments, listed gifts for his daughter, recalled how much money he had spent on the child's treatment, how much energy, nerves, and finances he spent on the house under construction, which was still not ready. Then he recalled the car he'd given Emily. His wife remained silent as Jason's mind was frothing at the mouth about financial security. She was bitterly aware that their paths were beginning to diverge. Sometimes the man realized it himself. When he thought about his family, about what they had been through together, he felt guilty. He realized that it was all in the past, and now his values and goals had changed. "Yeah, I know. Well, maybe you should go on vacation somewhere," he suggested at once. Where to the woman sighed. "My friend opened a recreation center. It's gorgeous, a lake, a forest, houses with panoramic windows, a bathhouse, a restaurant. There's no connection. Chloe and myself will rest." Some new acquaintance again, Emily thought. At first she wanted to give up the idea, but then suddenly decided. "Why not? I'll go with my daughter, really. You know, Jason, why not?" Emily said. "Why say no? I mean, you describe it so beautifully." "Here we go. Here you go. I'll call him, and they'll see you there." Jason was glad that for once recently he had aroused his wife's emotions. Emily didn't want to delay the trip. She'd just gotten her car back from the repair shop, and she missed traveling. She really wanted to take one of her girlfriends with her, but no one could keep her and Chloe company. "But nothing, dear. We'll be together and have fun," she promised her daughter and hugged her skinny shoulders. "Of course, Mommy," Chloe said and smiled. "Yes, we'll take the guitar." "No, Kitty, I'm afraid for her. It is very dear to me, so we won't take it on a trip. But you know, in places like this, there's a guitar and maybe a piano. I'll definitely play it for you, honey." Mother and daughter hugged again. They loved hugging and tried to show their love as often as possible. "Mom, I love you so much," said Chloe. "And I you, my baby," answered Emily and pressed the girl to herself. Her daughter was 7 years old, and the older she became, the more sensible and interesting it was with her. That's why Emily had no doubt she would not miss her on the trip. Chloe would always tell her something or sing a song. Jason spent his girls with a pure heart, and he went to one of the elite areas of the city, where he had fun at his mistress's apartment. Their antics were in full swing when the phone rang. No, Jason, don't pick up the phone. Don't pick up the phone," hissed the mistress. "Emily, this could be a very important business call. In our business, every call can be crucial." Despite the girl's resistance, he picked up the phone. "Hello, Jason Alexandrovich," came a dry official voice. "Yes, who are you?" Tensed the producer, realizing that in their creative circles do not talk like that. "It's the police. Do we have your daughter? Come here." "What do you mean? What happened?" Jason was puzzled, suspecting it was some kind of divorce. "They found her on the highway." "We'll give you more details when we get there," the voice said. Jason began to dress hurriedly. He hadn't heard his lover's accusation, hadn't even noticed the pillow she'd thrown at his head. After pulling on his clothes and buttoning himself up, he rushed to the ward, where his frightened daughter was waiting for him. There was a huge abrasion on her face and a bruise on her head. The blind child was shaking even though she had already been sedated. Jason rushed over to his daughter and pulled her to him. "Chloe, baby, what's wrong?" the worried father asked. "Daddy, Daddy," exclaimed the girl and felt his face to be sure, though she didn't need to. Chloe recognized her father by smell and timbre of voice, even by steps. Put a crowd of men and women in front of the little girl, and she will recognize her relatives, although she sees nothing. "What's wrong, my girl?" a man tried to find out. A trim woman in a uniform approached Jason and offered to go with her. No, let my daughter wait. Don't worry about her. Keep an eye on her." The confused producer followed the woman, and as the door slammed shut behind them, she told him the terrible news. "Your wife's car has been in a terrible accident. You'll need to come with us for a lineup." "Are you saying my wife is dead?" Jason's breath smelled of everything, and the case was inside. "You have no sympathy," the woman said. Apparently, she'd decided to kill herself by dropping the baby off at the highway and driving off. At high speed, she skidded and fell off a cliff. After the accident, the car caught fire as your wife was apparently unconscious from the impact. She had no chance of survival. We'll have more details after the forensics. Now let's go. Brace yourselves. This is a tough one. Jason was put in the car, and he was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't realize he was at the door to the basement. As he stepped confidently across the threshold, he suddenly realized where he had come. Something inside him turned, and Jason almost lost consciousness. "Get ready," someone said from behind him, and put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't even realize if it was a man's voice or a woman's. Jason was led over to a table with a sheet covering his body. The man in the white robe looked into Jason's eyes, apparently reading the readiness to see the terrible things in them, pulled the sheet away from the body. The producer's eyes darkened instantly. He clutched at his solar plexus and barely managed not to faint. "Is that her?" The same unknown voice asked him from behind. It's her. Jason nodded and turned away. "Did you get a good look?" The voice asked again. Yes, I see it. It's definitely her," Jason said with difficulty and ran out of the room. He hurried outside for a breath of fresh air and to think about how he was going to live his life. Yes, he'd cheated on his wife, but it was a physical affair. His heart was always with Emily and Chloe. He likened cheating to eating at a restaurant. Delicious, expensive, beautiful. But nothing compares to a dinner at home, where perhaps they offer the simplest dishes, but they are prepared with heart and love. Nevertheless, sometimes you want to go to a restaurant too. And now Jason was regretting it. He regretted that he hadn't taken his wife and daughter to the recreation center himself. He could have lied to Emily, saying that he had a lot to do, that he had important meetings, and that a lot depended on them. And she did not argue. She kissed him, hugged him, and wished him success. After that, she got into her car with her daughter and left for good. But why did she do that? Police say it's unlikely she had anyone helping her. Most likely, she failed to control her car. But then she wouldn't have dropped her daughter off on the highway. Didn't Jason notice that his wife was so tired of all this life, his constant traveling, his blind child, that she threw her daughter off a cliff? Maybe she was taking something illegal. You don't know? Jason jerked and turned around. The woman from the ward was standing behind him, and her words were so in sync with his thoughts that he almost dropped his cigarette. "I don't think so," the man replied, confused. Emily had always been in favor of a healthy lifestyle. She did yoga. She hardly ever drank alcohol. Wine with her girlfriends and on holidays. but I didn't see her much. A lot of work lately. The ME. Took the necessary tests. Soon there will be an answer, and we will know everything, the woman said dryly. I've been working for a long time, so I know very well that sometimes a husband and wife know much less about each other than friends and other people around them. Be strong. The important thing is that your daughter is alive. Have you talked to Chloe? I hope you were delicate, asked the man with hope. But from the woman's look, he realized that he could not count on it. The girl says she was tired and fell asleep with her headphones on. She woke up to someone pushing her out of the car. Someone? Jason wondered. Yes, someone. The woman nodded and asked for a light. So she's saying it wasn't her mother, the man said, holding the lighter to the cigarette. Could she have seen anything? The woman asked a reasonable question. You see, she couldn't, but she could feel it. Your daughter only felt when she was pulled out of the car and thrown to the ground. Your wife grabbed the child under the armpits and roughly pushed her out, leaving her sitting on the curb. By the time the girl realized what had happened, she was gone. It couldn't have happened, exclaimed the man. You said yourself there was no one else in the car. Chloe was driving with her mother. Emily turned on her English lesson so that Chloe would listen on the road, and the girl discreetly put on headphones and listened to some music of her own. Then I rocked her and she fell asleep. Yes, she falls asleep quickly in the car. According to her, the car didn't stop. The mother wasn't talking to anyone, or she would have heard it. Through the headphones, the man frowned. Well, why not? Blind people have sensitive hearing. The woman shrugged and blew a puff of smoke into Jason's face. Look, Jason, it's lucky Chloe's alive. It's scary to think what would have happened if Emily had suddenly wanted to take her daughter with her. Maybe that's what she'd wanted to do, but at the last moment something in her soul had shifted. When Jason arrived home, he tried to feed Chloe dinner, but she could only swallow yogurt. He put her to bed and forgot to remind her to brush her teeth. He didn't know where his daughter's pajamas were, what kind of pillow she liked to sleep on, or what kind of blanket she used. Jason knew almost nothing about his daughter, and he realized he had a lot to learn. But would he be able to handle a special needs child alone, much less a girl? But when he saw that his daughter was finally asleep, the man got up from the low stool he'd been sitting on beside her bed. He looked once again at her pretty face, then shifted his gaze to the snow-white guitar hanging on the wall in the same room, and sighing, stood for a moment and turned on the kettle to the minimum light. Then he walked out of the bedroom and closed the door behind him. Tomorrow, a new day and a whole new life awaited him and his daughter without their mother, without his wife, and without the reliable guardian angel who had always protected their family, but whose wings had suddenly broken. The prison gates, painted a dirty green, rumbled shut behind Elizabeth's back. Yesterday's prisoner was in no hurry to leave. She looked out at the May sun and smiled serenely. In her hand, she was carrying a small gym bag. In her pocket was money, barely enough to rent a corner in the dormitory. For 7 years, she had been turning the sewing machine handle, but she had never gotten rich. Elizabeth had no relatives and no friends. And how could she make friends with such an ugly scar across her face and such gray, gnarled teeth? People judge by appearances, and Elizabeth had her whole life imprinted on her face. Of course, 7 years ago wasn't so bad, except for the huge fresh scar on her face. But her teeth had deteriorated from poor nutrition, and her skin was gray and loose from disease. They wouldn't even take Elizabeth as a guitarist, so she had to take the unpleasant job. Let her sit on the back row of the girl on her balalaika, said the supervisor. But the attitude towards her daughter changed when she suddenly sang. She sang in such a way that all claims to her appearance instantly fell away. No one cared about the scar, because Elizabeth's voice was like breaking down the prison walls, helping her comrades to distract themselves from the harsh reality. It was a pity that the instrument Elizabeth played was left in prison. In parting, the woman played her favorite composition and, stroking the guitar on the lacquered body, said, "That's it. I am now a free bird. And you, friend, stay here in captivity." In response, the strings of the guitar tinkled pitifully, and Elizabeth, putting the instrument aside, left the assembly hall. Many sat and cried when it was time to say goodbye to the guitarist. After all, who else would sing so well for them live? Concerts were one of the few entertainments for the prisoners. We can only hope that some other artist will beat up her roommate and go to jail for a long time, becoming a local celebrity. And as in any detective story, Elizabeth had her envious friends who were rubbing their hands together, happy that now they and their talents would come to the forefront. But one thing the inmates were unanimous in envying was that her time in prison was coming to an end. How long had she waited for freedom? The will both terrified and beckoned her at the same time. How would she live? What would she do? Elizabeth decided not to think about it yet. First, she decided to at least take the first step, to walk down the road on her own, without an escort, without looking back at the prison gates. She gathered air into her lungs and took the first step, and then another and another. It was like plunging into icy water. The farther one walked, the easier it became. The first night, Elizabeth had to spend the night at the train station because she didn't pass the face control at the hostel. People looked at her sideways, avoided her, and Elizabeth wanted to go back to prison for the first time. Yeah, it's hard out there. Sometimes it's depressing and hopeless. But she had her guitar there. There Elizabeth was her own, and here she was a stranger, unwanted. The will doesn't welcome her, doesn't want to accept her. Having bought a cake and tea, Elizabeth ate furtively, as if she were stealing. She was ashamed of her appearance, especially when she saw prosperous women around her in beautiful clothes with beautiful hairstyles. Perhaps the average person would say that they were just ordinary women, and that their clothes were cheap and their hairstyles were so bad. But they seemed to Elizabeth a model of prosperity. They had a roof over their heads, an apartment or a house. And maybe they didn't have the rich furnishings of their homes. But these women had something that seemed incredibly valuable to Elizabeth: a soft bed, a private bathroom, the ability to drink coffee in the morning and look out the window. And they could also walk up to the cashier, ask for a ticket, and no one would look at them askew, with prejudice. No one will question whether to let them into the entryway. They could walk into a store with beautiful clothes, and even if they didn't buy anything, they wouldn't be chased out. Elizabeth was aware of her dire situation, but it wasn't all bad. A comrade had given her a note with her sister's address and name. Don't worry, she won't take much, but at her in the open air you'll have time for that. Eat, get yourself cleaned up, then you're going to get a job. For the ex-convict it was ideal, because she had no one. Her sister lived in another city, so Elizabeth did not immediately decide to leave. She did not know this city at all, where she would go to the metropolis. It was very frightening. But after wandering a little more in the local streets and receiving refusals, even from the owners of old private houses, on which hung an ad room for rent inexpensive, Elizabeth decided that it was necessary to leave, or she would have to beg for alms. Having gone through another stage of humiliation while buying a ticket and boarding the train, Elizabeth took her seat by the toilet, huddled in a corner, and stared out the window with a large woolen shawl. The measured clatter of the wheels soothed the woman and distracted her from her anxious thoughts. It suddenly seemed to her that the train was taking her away from the terrible, gloomy past to a bright, happy future. Greening trees whizzed past. The roadsides were green, emerald from the grass, which had not yet had time to fade from dust and summer heat. How good it is. Elizabeth thought and smiled unabashedly. The train ride had been the happiest moment of Elizabeth's life in years, and the woman was scared to leave the carriage when the train arrived at the station. Taking a deep breath, she stood up, pulled her shawl over her head, and tried to tie it so that the scar would not be visible. Then she slouched down, shrunk into a ball, and headed for the exit. "Stand back." Old woman, a middle-aged man, threw her angrily when Elizabeth hesitated on the platform and prevented him from passing. "I'm not an old woman," Benny whispered confusedly when the man was already far away. This abundance of people of different sexes and ages, the hustle and bustle around them, and the incessant clamor frightened Elizabeth. A daze came over her, and she felt an animal fear. It must be the way a dog feels when it has escaped from an evil master and finds itself in the center of the city. It seems to have broken free, but it is also frightened. At the same time, this place seemed surprisingly familiar to her. Of course, all train stations looked alike, but this one was special. Perhaps it was a sign that the city was showing her friendliness. Elizabeth imagined again, as she had on her first day of freedom, as if she were entering cold water, and took the first step, then another, and then another down into the subway. She quickly figured out how to get through the turnstiles, how to find the right station. And that was surprising, because Elizabeth knew clearly that she had never been on the subway. She hadn't been in this city at all, but now she felt at home. The main thing was not to be chased away. Fortunately, no one was going to chase her away. True, they looked at her documents twice. Well, there's nothing wrong with her papers. You're welcome to look. 90th year of birth. You look older, lady. The clerk grinned and handed Elizabeth back her passport. It's been a hard life, the woman sighed and wandered away. As she rode in the train car, she even allowed herself to relax. There was no discomfort. Everything was her own. Such familiar déjà vu. When she got off the subway, Elizabeth took the streetcar. Here, too, she quickly learned where and how to get on. But from the streetcar, she had to walk for a long time to find the right house. It was an old 5-story building, still quite sturdy. But she didn't like the apartment she found. It was a dungeon. "And you, Emily, I warned you," said the unpleasant woman who opened the door without saying hello. Elizabeth reread the note from her sister in Cincinnati and slipped it into the pocket of her dirty robe. "Well, come in." "What are you waiting for?" Rihanna said gruffly. Elizabeth timidly crossed the threshold and found herself in a narrow hallway littered with all sorts of junk. "Don't drop anything," the woman named Rihanna warned. "Go straight to the hall." The hall was what she pathetically called the only common room with shabby wallpaper. Tattered tulle hung from the dirty windows. The ceiling, yellowed by tobacco smoke, was covered with dirty dark wallpaper with rusty stains. Near the window stood an old, once lacquered table, on which cigarette butts were mercilessly stewed. The tabletop was littered with all sorts of things, including dirty dishes and leftovers with cigarette butts sticking out. There were dirty mattresses and blankets in the corners with cockroaches crawling past them. The room was so stuffy and stinky that Elizabeth almost threw up. "What are you fidgeting for?" "Give me the money for the night," Rihanna bellowed angrily, showing the disgusting stumps of her black teeth. I don't know," Elizabeth began. Here she doesn't know. "Well, go on then. The bums on the street with a face like that won't take you in for the night." Elizabeth sighed. She knew she had neglected her appearance. At least she still had her voice, though it wasn't as sonorous as it used to be. "Here," she said, holding out the bills to the hostess. "Welcome," the woman stretched out and quickly tucked the money into her pocket. "What were you in jail for?" "I'm a decent man. I don't take in just anyone." "You killed your roommate," Elizabeth sighed. "That's good for you. Let me go get a drink. We'll sit down and you can tell me all about it," Rihanna suggested. Elizabeth ignored her suggestion. "I have nothing to hide," the hostess shrugged and led her guest into the kitchen. Once inside, Elizabeth regretted giving her money away. She had never seen such a pigsty. Before prison, she had also lived in some kind of den, but she didn't remember it at all. Perhaps the alcohol and drugs had damaged her memory. Besides, Elizabeth had been beaten over the head by her own friends and drinking buddies. Maybe it was a good thing she couldn't remember anything, but the woman was certain she had never had such filth. She couldn't live in such conditions, even if she was perpetually drunk. There had clearly been a fire in the kitchen, put out in time. Some of the furniture and walls were black, sooty. Remnants of surviving curtains hung from the eaves. There were unwashed dishes and a thick layer of greasy dirt. "There's no water. They turned it off for non-payment," the landlady warned aggressively. "Where will we get it from?" "From the pump, honey." "Is the stand far away?" Elizabeth ventured to ask. "2 streets away," Rihanna replied grudgingly. "So, you need a well right under your nose." Rihanna's face was covered in new bright spots that looked frightening against her gray-green skin. "Does the gas work?" Elizabeth tried to turn the conversation, to which the landlady contorted a disgruntled face. "I have all the comforts of light and gas," she muttered with resentment in her voice. "That's good already," Elizabeth thought. Only an eerie odor from somewhere to her left kept her uneasy. "Is there a restroom in there?" she asked, jabbing her finger at the door. "The bathroom," Rihanna replied defiantly. Barely had Elizabeth opened the door when she felt as if she'd been punched in the face with a fist. "Oh my God, what is this?" she exclaimed, gasping at the stench. "That, honey, is the restroom. A separate one, by the way." "Not like you're used to a shared one," Rihanna said. "I have my own apartment, by the way." "Why does it stink so bad?" Elizabeth couldn't stand it. "Because this toilet is a latrine," Rihanna shrugged nonchalantly. Elizabeth later learned that the toilet in this house doesn't work. For small needs, the owners go to the bathroom or the sink, and for large ones in bags, which are either thrown out of the window, or they remain lying on the dirty floor. And that, as it turned out, wasn't the worst of it. That same evening, Rihanna's drinking buddies came over to drink the money she had gotten from her tenants. Elizabeth was also invited to the table, but the woman huddled in a corner and only prayed that she was not touched. Fortunately, the alcoholics were not violent. They drank themselves unconscious and slept through the night. Elizabeth realized she couldn't take another day in that shelter. Scolding herself for giving the landlady the last of her money, she took her bag and left the apartment for good. The deposit she had given to the landlady had been drunk by the marginalized, and there was no one to claim the money back. But why was she so stupid? She had been fooled many times in prison, too. Once she was even beaten up. Good thing there were always serious women to protect the singer. Otherwise, she would have died there. But now she had to live alone in this city with no help, no friends, no money. She had some pennies left, but she couldn't rent a place to live on them, and she didn't want to go to an orphanage. More than anything else, Elizabeth was afraid of losing her documents, because that would mean the beginning of the end. Although she was already at the beginning of the end, the woman saw no light ahead of her. And okay, it was warm now, but what to do next? In the blink of an eye, the city went from friendly to hostile for the ex-convict. She had to sleep in train stations, in gazebos, in parks. Elizabeth didn't get enough sleep. Her bones ached from the hard benches. Then she decided to buy herself a sleeping bag. It would be easier. Surprisingly, when Elizabeth started using a sleeping bag, she got less complaints from random passers-by. Apparently, they thought she was a tourist or an eccentric millionaire. Or maybe they just didn't associate a person with a sleeping bag with a homeless person. "I still have to present him with a tent," Elizabeth joked to herself. The hobo was doing her best to avoid running into the police. But surprisingly, the police didn't even notice her, like a stray cat. The woman had no money for food. But she found out that once a day a charity organization gives out free hot lunches. She had to wait in line, but in the end, the soup and buckwheat porridge she received was a lifesaver. In addition, she learned that among the seemingly marginalized people there are quite decent and educated people. There are also old retired women whose relatives take away their pensions to the penny. These old ladies look nice because they are used to living decently in any conditions. Such is their upbringing. They were very ashamed that they had to go for free food, because they worked all their lives and never asked anyone for a penny. But now they had to humiliate themselves. Elizabeth's heart shrank at this picture. She also met Justin, a philosopher in an old Soviet suit with a dirty shirt and a red Soviet cocked hat. Where'd he get one of those? Justin's face was soaked, but remarkably clear thinking and impeccable speech. Turns out he was a Marxist professor at the university when his major was abolished. He became a philosophy professor, then tried to work as a psychologist. But it was the bad 90s, when his salary was delayed for months. His wife couldn't stand it, took her son and left him for a lover. And he got drunk, first lost interest in life, then lost his home. But what Elizabeth liked best of all was Lavina the dog lady. She wasn't homeless or unemployed. She lived in her own apartment with 3 small dogs of unknown breed. Lavina was a math major and earned money by tutoring and writing term papers. But she spent all the money she received on stray dogs, Lavina said, and she took them all to herself, and of course the neighbors are not happy. My 3 tails sometimes make such a scandal among themselves. It's horrible, but I feed the homeless dogs and cats and treat them. Sometimes I can't even buy myself a piece of bread. I give everything to the vet and still remain indebted to the veterinary clinic because a dog is now more expensive to cure than a person. That's why the lunches save me. But not only that, free lunches, as it turned out, were saving Lavina. She once confided in Elizabeth that she collected candy at the cemetery. Sometimes you just want sweets so badly. Blushing, the old woman confessed. I go there myself. I go to the cemetery and find a candy. I eat it. And with gratitude I bow to the graves and take a little. If flowers wilt or a vase falls, I pick them up and water them, if I see that they're drying out. Would you like me to take you with me next time? Elizabeth agreed. All her thoughts were on food. The woman was always hungry and longed for the time in prison when they had been fed 3 times a day. Now she had to beg at the market, where kind women gave her vegetables and diluted cookies. Elizabeth had originally gone to the market to get a job as something to do. She was allowed to pick over the fruit and was given the whole marriage for it. The next day she went to the market again and helped set up a tent for the egg vendors, for which she received a whole tray of broken eggs. It was these eggs that became the cement that cemented the friendship between Elizabeth and Avalanche. Like in ancient times when egg whites were used to build temples that still stand today. That day Elizabeth approached Lavina in line and said, "You know, I got a tray of beaten eggs. I have absolutely nowhere to store them, and I can't cook them because my camping burner is out of gas and I don't have any money for a new canister. I'd like to give these eggs to you. Make scrambled eggs at home. Share with your pony-tailed pets." Avalanche nearly cried when Elizabeth handed her a tray of the valuable protein source. "Thank you so much, girl," Lavina pronounced. "I don't usually do this, but I'll make an exception for you. I'm very afraid of strangers, even if they seem nice. But I'll invite you to my place nonetheless. Come and make eggs together in my kitchen. I have butter, I have salt, and I also have tea. Come along." Elizabeth did not refuse, and off they went. Lavina turned out to have a very modest dwelling, but pleasant despite the presence of 3 dogs. Sometimes the woman brought an animal, a cat or a dog, for foster care. So for such an occasion there was a huge cage in the room. New animals should always be quarantined, she explained. They have a chain reaction to that, don't they? It'll spread to the others in no time. I won't be able to cure them then. Avalanche and Elizabeth made scrambled eggs and had a very good meal. Elizabeth did not linger because she could see that the old woman was uncomfortable having a stranger in her kitchen with such a disfigured face and past. So she chose to tactfully leave. This caused her to burst into tears even more. Elizabeth examined the unfortunate girl from head to toe. She looked about 15, very pretty long hair, expensive school uniform, leather shoes. Just a picture. "How did you end up here?" Elizabeth asked politely. "I think my friends played a trick on me," she replied. "They said we were going on a picnic. After school, we got into the car that Ben, my classmate, borrowed from my father. They ended up driving me here, to the cemetery. They took my backpack and my phone and ran away. They didn't even tell me it was a cemetery. I'm not stupid and I know the coldness of gravestones. When we walked here, I seemed to remember how many steps we took and where we turned. But when I tried to get out of the cemetery, I realized that I'd gotten confused and lost. They were leading me by the hands. If I had touched the tombstones as we walked, I definitely wouldn't have gotten lost. But I had no idea I was in a cemetery," said the girl and burst into tears again. "Don't cry, I'll take you home," Elizabeth said, deciding to address the girl on a first-name basis. "What's your name and where do you live?" "My name is Chloe," the girl said. That name made Elizabeth's heart throb. "What a beautiful name," she said. "Did your mother call you that?" "Yes," said the girl, rising and wiping away her tears. "My mother. But she's long gone. I have only my father and stepmother." "I'm sorry," Elizabeth sighed, and taking the girl by the arm, led her to the exit. "Thank you. You are so good, I trust you completely. And your voice is so familiar. I'm sure you won't deceive me, won't lead me to a dangerous place," said the schoolgirl sincerely. She was very curious and asked Elizabeth the whole story of her life. "Bunny. I had nothing to hide, but I didn't have much to tell either," she sighed. "They say I killed my roommate." "Wow. Did he beat you?" asked Chloe. "I do not remember. I don't remember him at all," Elizabeth answered. "It's like the past has been erased. They say that in my past life I drank a lot and also hit me on the head, hence the memory lapses." Elizabeth led the girl out of the cemetery but decided to finish the job and bring her home. It turned out that their way lies in an elite settlement, and if it were not for Chloe, whom the guards knew well, the vagrant Elizabeth would definitely not be allowed on the territory. The house where Chloe lived was large and stunningly beautiful. Elizabeth opened the gate by a young guard whose name, as it turned out, was Ben. "Good afternoon, Chloe," he politely greeted the girl. "And who are you with?" "This is my savior," answered the schoolgirl. "I am very indebted to her, so now we are coming to lunch with me." "As you say," Chloe nodded the guard and gave way to Elizabeth. The young mistress confidently led Elizabeth through her possessions, and the woman noted that, despite her lack of sight, the girl navigated freely through the house, so luxurious that Elizabeth was breathless. She also moved freely, stepping over thresholds where necessary, going around furniture, and even up and down the stairs with ease. Elizabeth thought for a second that Chloe was playing a trick on her, and she wasn't blind at all. "What do you mean? I know every corner of this place. My dad started building this house when my mom was a kid. He dreamed of us all living here, so he was very sad when she didn't get to see the fruits of his labor. In general, I navigate very well in a familiar space. I even go to a school for healthy children. Of course, it is a private school, so I have a special teacher who helps me to digest the material. And I have special textbooks, printed in Braille. But in an unfamiliar place, I am often helpless." It turned out that the house has a housekeeper, a maid, a personal cook, and a gardener. But despite the abundance of service personnel, the girl did not give the impression of a spoiled child. Young rich woman was very caring and was very concerned that the guest was comfortable in her home. The first thing she did was to feed Elizabeth to her heart's content, ordering her to set the table in the dining room. Then she asked the maid to help her guest from the bathroom, give her a clean towel and robe, and show her what and how to turn on. The maid performed all the errands. But the housekeeper did not like the liberties that the young mistress allowed herself, so she called Chloe's stepmother, Casey, who at that moment was in the beauty salon. She even had to give up the last procedure to rush home. What? Casey was outraged. Chloe brought home a vagrant? It's not a tramp, but my friend, and she's staying here, said the girl firmly. Are you out of your mind? Shouted the stepmother, looking disdainfully at Elizabeth, who even after a shower looked dismal. No, I'm not. She's my savior. And if you don't like something, call your father. All right, Casey nodded and dialed her husband's number. Hello, Jason. Can you imagine what your daughter is doing? After briefly summarizing the situation, the woman listened to her husband's reaction and handed the phone to her stepdaughter. Here, he wants to talk to you. Yes, Daddy? No, I want her to stay. Yes, I agree. We could just give her money and rent an apartment, but we can't help her with that. Dad, we need her to stay with us. I don't know. Let her be my nurse. I'm an invalid, in case you've forgotten. Stay out of it, Dad. Imagine what it would be like if some alcoholic found me in this cemetery, or if I was attacked by a maniac. Okay, thank you, Daddy, I love you. With a victorious look on her face, the girl returned the phone to her stepmother. Here you go. I've settled everything with my father. Elizabeth is staying, and it's my responsibility. She waved to her new caregiver and led her to her room. This is so embarrassing, Elizabeth said. Her cheeks flamed with shame. Don't worry, Casey only looks nervous, but she's actually a good woman. We have a cool relationship with her, but the main thing is that she suits Daddy. He's had women like that before her. Oh, I hate to think about it. Excuse me, where am I going to sleep? Elizabeth asked, amazed at her own impudence. She was too embarrassed to stay at Lavina's house so as not to make her uncomfortable, but she wanted to linger in this house. And not just because it reminded her of a palace. She just didn't want to leave that sweet blind girl. Wait, she heard Casey shouting from downstairs. When my father comes back and sees this beauty, his hair will stand on end. Don't pay attention, Chloe waved her hand. Dad will be back in a week. During this time, she will get used to you and will not perform. By the way, you know my father is a famous producer, Jason Riley. No, I haven't heard that. Oh, well. By the way, you can sleep in the guest room next to mine. I'll show you. Chloe opened the door, and Elizabeth found herself in teenage girl heaven. It wasn't a little princess's pink room, all in ruffles and bows, with lots of dolls. This was a girl's room, a very young girl's room indeed, but a girl nonetheless. Elizabeth entered Chloe's room. The colors were pastel, calm. The furniture was expensive, light-colored, a little pretentious. The main place was occupied by a huge high bed, on which it was possible to arrange a whole disco in pajamas. The source of light was a huge window. It was slightly open, and the curtains swayed in the light breeze. It's so nice, Elizabeth said and fell on the bed without asking permission. And Chloe fell down beside her. Yes, it's nice, she nodded. Sorry for the question. Why do you need garlands on the walls, posters? You can't see it, can you? Elizabeth realized her tactlessness. Is it for girlfriends? Chloe answered sadly. We used to gather at my place, jumping on the bed, throwing ice cream, even drinking cider. But after today, I see that I have no girlfriends. They're the ones who got me into this insidious prank. My poor girl, said Elizabeth and drew Chloe to herself to hug, snuggled in the arms of a new acquaintance. You feel so good, so warm, and your voice is just like Mama's, only it doesn't smell as much, the girl said, apologizing. Mom always smelled like expensive perfume. But still, I'm sure you're very pretty. Elizabeth smiled and stroked the girl's head. You should see my face with the scar. My teeth. You wouldn't talk like that. I might have. I'm glad I can't see. But we blind men look with our hearts, and I can see that you are a very good man. Beautiful souls. Chloe felt that she was about to cry. Elizabeth tried to distract her. I see a lovely white guitar. I've never seen one of those before. Will you let me play it? No, Chloe answered. And please don't touch it, okay? Of course, I'm sorry, Elizabeth hurriedly apologized. It's okay. It's not your fault. It's just that it's Mom's guitar. The memory of it is her special thing, you know. I understand. And I'm sorry again, Elizabeth said quietly. Do you know how to play? She tried to change the subject. Yes, and I sing well, bragged the woman. Well, then I'll play the guitar for you and you'll play for me, Chloe smiled. Of course, Elizabeth smiled and stroked the girl's head again. In the role of a caregiver for Elizabeth, practically nothing had to be done. Her ward was completely independent. Sometimes she needed a little help, but that couldn't even be called labor. Rather, Elizabeth lived in this family as a relative. A very poor and distant relative, who was not particularly welcomed by the other family members and servants. But they couldn't refuse her. Either she had blood of her own, after all. Elizabeth tried not to cross paths with Kayla, but it was not difficult. The rich producer's wife was always on the move, either on set or at a party, so the week went smoothly. Sometimes Elizabeth was a little bored because there was no one to socialize with. The servants didn't know how to treat her, so they shunned her. Chloe was at school either doing homework or tutoring. Elizabeth ended up eating, sleeping, walking around the garden, or watching TV in her room. In any case, it was a sin to complain about the share, because not so long ago she dreamed of at least a roof over her head, and now she lives in the palace, albeit on the bird's rights of a nurse. Her relationship with Chloe was perfect. Only once the girl got a little angry when Elizabeth could not resist and touched the strings of a snow-white guitar with her fingers, and the instrument immediately made a rapturous sound. Elizabeth, you and I had a deal. It's not like I'm asking for much. Don't touch my mom's guitar, Chloe reacted sharply. I'm sorry. Elizabeth apologized. I don't want to quarrel with you, but there are sacred things for me, and I ask you to respect that. Elizabeth vowed not to touch the guitar. But as you know, the stricter you are forbidden something, the sweeter the forbidden fruit. And one day when Chloe was at school, the servants went about their business, and the housekeeper was knitting in her room. Elizabeth had the nerve to come into the girls' room and take the guitar off the wall and play. What a pleasure it was to hold that noble instrument in her hands. She wanted to play just a little to close the gestalt, but the longer she held the instrument, the less she wanted to let it go. She decided to sing. She sang one romance, then another, and before she knew it, a model appeared before her eyes. The girl's face was twisted with anger. I begged you not to touch my mom's guitar, screamed the schoolgirl. I'm sorry. And the woman began to apologize hastily. She was so frightened by her young friend's anger that she didn't notice the man standing behind her. It was Jason. He had returned from a business trip and had taken his daughter out of class early to spend more time with her. Raising her eyes to the stern man, Elizabeth whispered, "Please don't be angry. I couldn't help myself. I will never again." Instead of answering, the man began to move slowly towards Elizabeth and kneeling down in front of her. Raising his trembling hands to the woman's disfigured face, he touched her skin and said softly, "Lord, great is thou." Elizabeth opened her mouth in surprise. Chloe froze, not realizing what was happening. Jason wrapped his arms around his head and sobbed loudly. Later, Jason said his heart sank when he heard his dead wife's voice coming from behind the door of his daughter's room. But when he walked in and saw Emily disfigured, albeit oblivious to him, he felt such an explosion of emotion inside that he nearly exploded into atoms. That day he had driven the unhappy woman to hysterics, trying to get her to remember anything at all. He showed her pictures of her little daughter, and she admitted that she had seen this little girl in her dreams. He had to turn to psychiatrists, hypnotists, and other specialists who work with people who have damaged memories. Chloe could not believe her happiness. Was her mommy really alive? On Sunday, Emily was shown her photos, things from her former life. And gradually she began to reconstruct the chain of events up to the day when she allegedly died. I was driving. Chloe was asleep in the back seat with her headphones on. Suddenly I saw an unkempt, disheveled girl kneeling on the side of the road, begging for help. I drove by at first, afraid to stop, but there were hardly any cars on that highway, so I decided to show mercy. Who else but me? I went back, got out of the car, but as soon as I approached the girl, I got something heavy on the head. I woke up in the woods. The girl was next to me in my clothes, and I was naked. She was cursing, calling me a rich girl. I grabbed a stick from the ground and hit her. We started fighting. Finally, she left this scar on my face and ran away, and I couldn't get up. I fainted a few times, but eventually I regained my strength. I got dressed and walked towards the highway. I couldn't think straight. I don't remember anything else. Flashes, police, hospital, court, jail. I don't remember much about the first year. The rest of the years are a little better. Jason made the investigators bring up the case files and conduct all the necessary examinations, including exhumation. He was well aware that in the grave, which he and his daughter had been caring for all these years, lay not his wife. But for the sake of order, everything had to be checked. When all the inquiries were over, the investigator told Jason that it was likely that the woman who had attacked Emily hadn't noticed at first that there was a girl sleeping in the back seat. She drove for several kilometers, and when she discovered the child, she simply pulled her out of the car and left her on the side of the road. The blind girl passed without realizing anything. Outwardly, Emily and her attacker, whose name was Elizabeth, were similar, though Elizabeth was younger. But because of the scar on her face, the bruises, and the negligence of the police, no one suspected that Emily had someone else's ID, and that she was not a wanted killer at all, but a victim of a crime. When the drug addict threw away her clothes and changed into Emily's, she left her passport in her pocket. But she wasn't likely to go back for it because she was on the run. Killed her roommate in a very brutal way. Emily, who had forgotten everything due to stress and multiple concussions, didn't even mind that she wasn't Elizabeth. The police wanted to close the case as quickly as possible, so the unfortunate woman was sent to jail without any special proceedings. Well, Jason kept the corpse of the sociopathic woman who had ruined the lives of his wife, his daughter, and himself. Most likely she was going to escape, but she lost control of the car and died. No one will ever know. It took a long time to help Emily get back to normal. Jason and Chloe surrounded the woman with incredible care. The producer paid the returned wife the best treatment, expensive plastic surgeries, dentist, turning her into a real star. "How beautiful you are. We are in admiration," he said. Emily didn't recognize herself. What happiness that this ugly scar is no longer, that her smile does not cause squeamishness in others, that the skin is no longer torn and smooth. Everyone was happy about Emily's miraculous return, except Kayla, who wandered around the house like a shadow, always crying. One day, Emily invited Jason and Kayla over for a conversation and said, "Jason, I'm very grateful to you for everything you've done for me, for raising such a wonderful daughter while I was away. But you have to admit, our marriage was broken before all of this happened. Yes, we've been through a lot together. But I'd like to set the record straight. You're married to Kayla? She's been there for you in times of need. She's been your homemaker. I'm your past. We'll always be close because we're the parents of a wonderful little girl. But I'd like to set the record straight about our relationship. I'm sorry, but I'll go my own way. And you and Kayla have a separate road of life that I wish you could travel together, hand in hand." Jason waved away a tear. Kayla threw herself around Emily's neck and burst into loud tears. "I'm sorry I thought badly of you. I was sure you were going to take my husband away from me," the woman wailed. But Emily wasn't going to go back to the past. She lived in her ex-husband's house for a while and then moved into the apartment he'd bought for her. Madison was now living in 2 homes, one at her mother's house and one at her father's. And she was fine with that, despite Jason's entreaties. Emily refused to pursue a singing career, though there were prospects, especially given her amazing story. But she'd had enough of the many talk shows and interviews that had earned her a good living, but which had frayed her nerves. "No, I'd had enough of being popular." Emily decided and began to realize the idea, which was firmly planted in her head when she was homeless. Emily started her own foundation and began to help those in need. She also, "We're very sorry, but your wife has passed away," the doctor said and left the waiting room. No sympathy, no empathy, just an indifferent statement of fact. Maybe not all doctors are like that, but on the other hand, what else can they say? "We did our best," this phrase brings even more pain. Better said as dryly as this doctor. Giles got up from the comfortable padded chair and tiredly asked to go to the labor room. Emily had been in labor for over 6 hours. The obstetrician had warned that there might be complications, and in the end she hadn't survived it. She lost too much blood. The man felt no grief, no anger, no despair. After he saw the doctors running back and forth, saying something quickly to each other in a panic, he knew immediately. But he and Emily had predicted this version of events as well. They had been prepared for this outcome in advance. The day before the birth, they had a very frank, sensual conversation. Emily was lying in a hospital bed in the VIP labor room. Giles was sitting next to her on a chair, reading the 5th chapter of a book. The only source of light was a floor lamp. The doctors had recommended that the mom to be rest her body as well as her spirit, and the white light of hospital lamps had a very negative effect on her emotional state. Therefore, it was decided to put a floor lamp in the room. In this room, in principle, it was very cozy. The price matched the quality. Giles had found his wife one of the best hospitals in the city. As he'd once said at his wedding, "To my wife, the very best, and after 5 years of marriage, he still kept his word." A real man. It took them a long time to get pregnant. At first, the doctors said the wife was infertile. She ran to different hospitals, but all the doctors, as if conspiring, said the same thing: to give birth to their children, there is no hope. Emily had given up hope. But one day she went to another private clinic, which she was advised by a friend. And she was not mistaken here, she was really helped. However, they immediately warned that the risk of death in her state of health is very high. But the woman still decided to give birth. She wanted to give her husband an heir. Giles had long persuaded his wife not to do it, for he truly loved her. If she died, he would die inside her. But his wife assured him that everything would be all right. They'd often argued about it, but then Giles realized that Emily wouldn't give up. She had always wanted a child, and he wanted an heir. Both hoped they would have a healthy boy, but fate had decided otherwise. Another ultrasound showed that soon they will have a girl. The parents-to-be were not upset by the news. Giles, to Emily's surprise, was even pleased. They organized the room, bought all the necessary things for the first time. The crib was made of very high-quality natural materials. Giles himself supervised the arrangement of the new room in their big house. To his wife, he said, "Don't worry about anything. You only need to look after yourself and the future child, eat well, exercise moderately, and drink the necessary vitamins." She followed all the doctor's recommendations, and the pregnancy went well, without any complications. And then finally the day of labor came. It turned out to be quite exciting, especially for Giles. Giles, shouted Emily, waking her husband at 4 in the morning. I'm in labor. Get up. As soon as the man heard these cherished words, he immediately jumped out of bed and ran to the pre-prepared suitcase. He called the driver, who had also been instructed in advance. Together they went to the hospital. They lived in the countryside, in a large private house. They were surrounded by a piece of almost untouched forest. The air here was very clean. That's why the family had chosen this place to build their cozy nest and put down roots. It was an hour-and-a-half drive to New York. The whole time, Emily was screaming, sighing, moaning. The contractions were truly unbearable. However, when the couple arrived at the hospital, the doctors stated that these were false contractions. Of course, the water had not broken yet, but the doctor strongly advised them to stay in the hospital, as the real labor was going to start any day now. They, of course, were allocated a separate paid room. Everything was already arranged for a comfortable stay of mother and child. By evening, Emily had some inexplicable feeling of anxiety, and she decided to share it with her husband. Darling, Emily said in a tired voice. Giles stopped reading the book and looked at his beloved wife. He stood up and slowly approached her, opening her hands with his palms. What is it, my soul? It sounded so gentle and pleasant. Giles gave off an aura of genuine family happiness and comfort and protection. Emily always felt as if she were under the wing of an angel. The doctor said that the labor might be difficult, and that there was a chance that I know, Giles said firmly. No, Giles said harshly. Don't you dare say that. But I want to keep myself and our baby safe. Please, Emily hesitated for a moment. If I'm gone, take care of our little girl, she said confidently and openly. She felt Giles' muscles visibly tense. That last phrase had almost made him angry, but he realized that he had to reason and think rationally about all the consequences. But of course he hoped that nothing dire would happen. You will not die. Again, Giles firmly assured his wife. Darling, you can't know for sure. Giles stood up abruptly and stepped away from Emily. He rested his forehead against the window pane and thought for a long time. Then he heard his wife's gentle voice. Giles, I love you. That voice had always soothed him. It was like a gentle lyre, like a nightingale singing. It was so gentle, so melodious, so long. I wanted to drown in it. Giles pulled himself away from the wall and looked at his beloved again. I love you too, sweetheart, he said. I promise that our daughter will have the best life possible. But promise me that you will not go to the other world. Don't leave me, please. A tear rolled down his face. It was very rare to see this strong man in such a mood. It was obvious that he was terribly worried with every fiber of his being. Giles had loved Emily like hell. Such bright people shouldn't leave so soon. I can't promise you anything, Giles, the woman said sadly. But I want you to know this. My love for you is boundless. I don't know what I dreamt tonight. My death is a bad omen. I have a bad feeling about it. So I thought I'd give you a warning. If I'm gone, give our little girl this. Emily ripped off her pendant and handed it to her husband. Emily. No, he said in shock, pushing the pendant away from her. You will give it to our daughter yourself? Do you understand? Emily returned the pendant to her chest. Giles looked sympathetically into her eyes again. There was something unsettling in his gaze, as if he were trying to avoid the storm that was clearly coming. He kissed her forehead and returned obediently to his chair, for Emily was very tired and closed her eyes immediately after the kiss. But her sleep didn't last long. It was 0400 when Giles woke up from his own disturbing dreams and heard Emily's screams. It sounded like it was coming from the depths of hell. He opened his eyelids and was immediately confronted by a nurse who was shouting something to him, but he couldn't understand a word. The girl threw a robe of some kind over Giles. "Wait a minute. Why do I need a robe?" Giles was indignant. He caught a glimpse of his wife being carried away on a stretcher. She was writhing in pain. She was being held by the hands of several doctors. "You're not having the baby with your wife. It's written in our contract that it's a joint labor." The nurse uttered in a panic while frantically looking at the paperwork. "Oh, I'm sorry, I think I got confused. You're..." Oh my God, Giles couldn't stand it. "Where's my wife? What's wrong with her?" The nurse looked at him apprehensively. She was much shorter than he was, and it seemed as if she was now being threatened by the patient himself, looming over her like a boulder. She clasped her hands to her chest as if she thought someone was dragging them, or the fierce force emanating from Giles would toss them aside. "Dear, calm down," she began in a soft voice, just as she had been taught. "You need to stay here or proceed to the waiting room." "Take me to the damn lounge," the man stretched out unhappily, rubbing his right temple. He had had a terrible headache since waking up. He waited in the waiting room of the maternity ward for several more hours. No one said anything. Everyone fidgeted, bringing in some documents, diapers, and machines. He was not even allowed to see his wife, who had passed away, citing the possible spread of an unidentified infection. Now he will see her only when he will say goodbye to her near the coffin. A young boy stopped in the corridor and studied the documents, underlining them with a pen. Giles, already completely out of hope, decided to try his luck. "Doctor," he called out to the young man. He didn't even blink an eye. "But are there so many doctors here, in this deserted, cold corridor?" Dr. Giles called out again. After the second shout, the young man turned around. It was only then that the always poised Giles allowed himself to stand up and walk over to him to ask his question. "Doctor, can you tell me how my daughter is doing? You were present at the birth. I saw you. Surely you know the whole situation." The young doctor looked at Giles sympathetically. There was no note of calm in the young man's eyes. He was agitated, very agitated. "I mumbled the boy. I'm just an intern. I'm not allowed to." But then his incoherent speech was interrupted by the knocking of the luxurious doors opening. A lush, pretty woman stepped into the light. She looked to be at least 45. She had bright red hair, and her robe fit her strong, fit and healthy body. Giles felt a certain insignificance to his existence when he saw her. Now that's a real American woman. That's what it's all about. "Are you the father?" she said indifferently. Then she went back to her paperwork. Giles felt some hope and immediately responded with an affirmative nod. "Come on in," she said without raising her eyes to him. Giles marveled at the fact that she could walk while looking at her papers and never once bump into anything. Suddenly this doctor did raise her voice, and it sounded far from soothing. Your daughter is in critical condition right now. We are fighting for her life. I'll tell you right away, the chances are slim, but they are there. Hang in there." Giles went into a trance. After he said those words, the image of Emily immediately came into his mind. He imagined the pain she had suffered in childbirth. Had it all been for nothing? Had she given her life to a man who would soon be dead too? Giles could already feel the incoming tears, but the sight of this woman gave him some confidence again. "Giles, I understand how you feel right now. But I want to assure you we will do everything we can. I've had enough cases like this in my lifetime, and many of them have ended very happily." "What about my daughter?" Giles shouted and stopped in the middle of the hallway. The woman looked at him with eyes full of regret. When are they going to stop looking at him like that? He was really annoyed that everyone here felt nothing but pity for him. He's a strong man and can handle all the difficulties. Your daughter had a very difficult birth. She had a birth trauma. Your wife passed away prematurely because of the difficult labor. Her heart couldn't take the strain. In addition, tests revealed a long-standing infection that had not previously manifested itself. If your child survives, he will be permanently disabled, unable to move around on his own. Do you understand? Those last words came out of the blue. They were imprinted in his mind for a long time. The worst thing for parents is to hear that their child will be a non-walking invalid, a lifetime confinement in a chair. She will always need outside help. When he dies, she will be institutionalized or, at best, hire a nanny, a caregiver. Or maybe she will be able to afford to hire one herself. Yes, she will be disabled, but only her body will be physically dysfunctional. But her mind, her intellect. The main thing is that the intellect will remain intact. She will be able to learn and achieve everything in her chosen field of endeavor. These thoughts came one after another in a steady stream, until the midwife's words came to him again. We need a week for her body to fully recover. During that time, she will be in intensive care in a special box. You can stay here, but I would advise you to go home and please hope for the best. It's no exaggeration to say we have the best doctors you'll find in this city. And we will do everything we can to keep your baby alive. With these words, she turned around and, without waiting for an answer, as if vaporized in the darkness of the long corridor. Apparently, while he wasn't looking, she'd gone into some kind of office closed by impenetrable doors with electronic locks. Giles had no choice but to go home. There was definitely nothing for him to do at the hospital. Now there was a funeral, a wake, paperwork to deal with. So much fuss. But Giles had grown to trust this confident, red-haired woman. She seemed to know her business. Giles frantically packed his things as if preparing to flee. No, he didn't need to run and hide from anyone. It was just that Emily's scent permeated this room. Her bed hadn't been made yet. The book she loved so much now lay on the nightstand, waiting to be read. On top of that book, Giles noticed some kind of a roll-up. He stepped closer and unwrapped the linen handkerchief. Inside was the very pendant his wife had tried to give him the day before. Giles had once given it to Emily as a token of his undying love. It was a gold fish with emerald eyes on a gold chain. The jewelry was custom-made. He gave it to his spouse on their first anniversary. Of course, then he gave many other, much more expensive and prestigious gifts. But for some reason, Emily cherished this particular pendant as the apple of her eye. She always said that this pendant was very special. It brought good luck. Giles's mind automatically replayed his late wife's voice. He clutched the pendant as tightly as he could to his chest and let himself shed a manly tear. "Luck is not on our side today," he whispered through his tears. Arriving home with suitcases full of his deceased wife's belongings, the first thing Giles did was to organize everything in the closets. The items were all soaked with her scent. He felt like a drug addict, a maniac who sniffed clothes in an attempt to get pleasure. But he had nothing else, nothing left of her. That smell was the only reminder of his departed love. He sat at her closet for a long time, scrutinizing every piece. How he missed that warmth. Emily had been his fire, the light that illuminated even the darkest days. He remembered her happy, always cheerful smile. That smile would forever remain in his memory. It's very rare to find someone so much like you. A soulmate you can trust with all the secrets of your soul. Giles had found one, but he'd quickly lost him. They'd dreamed of having a happy family, a home filled with children's laughter and little feet treading the floor. Now Giles was more broken than ever. He needed the help and support of love. His Emily used to give him all of that, but now he had no one else to turn to. There are too many jealous people around. If they want to help in any way, then they've already seen the benefit of being orphaned. Giles lay in his and Emily's bedroom for a long time. He remembered an ordinary morning, of which there were hundreds. Emily is alive and well, running around the room, getting ready to go somewhere, shouting and jokingly cursing at her husband because she has nothing to wear. Then she realizes that there's very little time left and runs to the dressing table to put on her makeup. Giles looks on with a genuine smile and can't believe his happiness. How lucky he is she has been replacing everyone for him, his friend, his lover, and even his co-workers. How many times she gave him very sound advice that really helped him in business. Why? Why do such people leave us so early? There was no answer to that question. It was time to get out of bed. Too much he had laid here today. The first thing Giles did was go to the study, and on the way he saw the nursery door slightly open. He carefully pulled the door open and looked around the room. He and Emily had been working on this nursery for months. The harmonious colors, the stroller, the bassinet, the toys. Now everything would have to be replaced with slightly different things. They needed to create a comfortable space for a girl who wouldn't have walking legs. Giles still hoped in his heart that this was all a mistake, that his daughter would get better and be as healthy as the other children. But soon all his hopes came crashing down at once. A couple of days later, he received a call from the hospital and was informed that the child had been saved. However, as warned, her lower limbs had atrophied. Giles wasn't allowed to pick up the girl until the following Monday. He would have to live alone for another week, though a part of him was glad of that. He would settle all matters concerning his wife and the child's equipment, and then he would be able to deal only with his daughter. As soon as he learned about the diagnosis, he immediately called several doctors from Germany, Japan, and Switzerland. 2 of them agreed to help. Of course, all these surgeries cost an awful lot of money, but that was certainly not a problem for Giles. He owned a lot of capital, partnered with many successful companies. His Tiny would have a nice inheritance. He just really didn't want the press to know about his daughter's illness. All matters that concerned the child were done completely privately. Soon a special custom-made chair, a massage table, and orthopedic bed were made for him for the future when the girl comes out of infancy. He consulted with doctors for a long time. They prescribed various drugs and injections that could alleviate the child's condition. There have been cases when a child with complete limb atrophy suddenly improved, learned to walk and do something on his own, said the red-haired midwife. The important thing is to treat the problem as early as possible. Of course, Giles hadn't forgotten about his dead wife. While he was dealing with the health of the newborn, he was also dealing with the funeral. According to Christian custom, burial was to take place on the 3rd day after death. Giles had always adhered to such rules, so he did everything as it should be done. On September 3rd, the coffin with Emily's body was brought to the cemetery. There were not many people present: Emily's friends, Giles' friends, and of course close relatives, but everyone numbered no more than 20. Everyone was crying and offering their sincere condolences, though Giles knew very well that for most they weren't sincere. These friends were jealous of Emily. It was just good for them to be friends with her. All of this blatant hypocrisy on their part had taken a terrible toll on Giles. To think that some of those horrible women had even tried to flirt with him in the cemetery, at his beloved wife's funeral. What was the world coming to? As soon as he threw a handful of earth into the fresh grave and the coffin was buried, he immediately left that horrible place where his darling Emily remained forever. Very quickly, the cherished week passed, and it was finally possible to pick up his daughter from the clinic. Giles was very anxious that day. He had taken several sedative pills, but the anxiety was not going anywhere. He was afraid he wouldn't make it. Any mistake seemed fatal. Still, he gathered his will into a fist and got into the car. The weather was unusually rainy, and it was pouring like a bucket. It was not uncommon in early September, of course, but Giles saw the warning signs in everything. Even the weather is mocking me, he thought to himself. The roads were almost deserted. The early yellowing trees tossed their dying leaves to the wind. The strong north wind shook the wires and flipped the birds that met them on the fly. Nature itself seemed to pine for the dead Emily with him. The driver stopped 100 meters from the hospital. He couldn't get any closer, all the parking spaces were taken. At another time, Giles would have insisted they drive under the barrier. But now, he didn't care now. Past the photographer standing at the ready and a cheery man with an armful of flowers, Giles lowered his head and made his way into the pathology department, probably meeting a happy wife and child. He thought with intense envy. And he has what? What did all the money, all the connections, everything he owned help him? We are utterly defenseless against death. We all swarm like ants, running back and forth frantically in an attempt to possess some amount of earthly goods. And what's the bottom line? We don't take with us even a fraction of what we own in life when we go back to where we came from. Could it all be that we are just imagining things? Those intrusive thoughts literally haunted Giles. Overcoming the nausea that came over him at the sight of the familiar hospital doors, he swung them open with force, walked past the security post, nodded to the machine gun, took the elevator to the correct ward. The same red-haired midwife was walking toward him, holding an infant. In addition to wrapping him in a cocoon of diapers, she gently, smilingly held out this little treasure to Giles. It startled him at first, and he even looked away for a moment. But then, realizing that it was his own child and his, no one else's responsibility in the world, he took the tiny defenseless creature in his arms. What was his surprise when he saw a perfectly healthy-looking little thing? There was nothing to suggest that this child was handicapped from birth. The tiny girl was awake. She looked directly at her father and even tried to smile at him. At least it seemed that way to him. God, how beautiful she was. "Excuse me, but what makes you think she's an invalid?" Giles asked the doctor in bewilderment. "She seems healthy now. But her arms and legs don't function," the doctor explained. And even her arms, Giles was horrified. "But you were only talking about atrophy of the lower limbs." "Unfortunately, not everything is at the mercy of medicine," the doctor shook her head sadly. "You can certainly sue our clinic, but I assure you we did the best we could." Giles, stunned, fell silent. This was certainly not a development he had been prepared for. "Let's go into the office. You should be getting your discharge papers." The voice sounded like a dream. Arms and legs. Oh my God, why did he have to do this? Why would she do that? I mean, she just came into this world. But she smiles better than any baby. Giles murmured, with some inner protest and tenderness at the same time. Perhaps such children are often more intelligent than others. "Take care of her, Daddy." The woman smiled and walked away, leaving Giles alone with his child, a child who would fundamentally change his life. But he certainly wouldn't give up. "Well, little Eve, let's get acquainted. I'm your daddy," he told his daughter. "I'm with you to..." "What's on the boss's mind?" Garrett spoke up. He had a very low voice. He always spoke in a bass voice, which put a lot of people off. But that was the quality Giles had recognized in Garrett when he first saw him. It was a guard's job to scare away the undesirables, and then to protect and fight. "There's no point in going to Japan," Giles said thoughtfully, looking out the airplane window. There was hardly anything to see out of the airplane. It was night, and the clouds were thickening. There were no colorful pictures to be seen. Giles wasn't interested. He was only looking out there to avoid looking at his child, who he wanted so badly to help. But he was powerless. "Why?" Garrett asked. Giles turned away from the window and looked at his guard. He looked interested. He clearly wanted to help. Indeed, sometimes he did. The man's advice was always excellent. When Giles had asked Garrett jokingly where best to take Emily on a first date, Garrett had immediately offered his idea. And no, it wasn't a run-of-the-mill restaurant. That night they went up to the roof of the tallest high-rise in the Arab Emirates and watched the starry sky. Memories of that distant date filled Giles' mind. "But can I open my eyes now?" Emily asked insistently. The tight bandage made it impossible to see through the fabric, and she stumbled down the steps as he led her up the stairs. "Now open it," he authorized, stepping back a step. Emily had a stunning view of the city at night. There were so many lights. There was a makeshift loft-style table right on the roof. There was a plate of selected fruits, seafood, and 2 glasses of wine. And next to it was a crystal bucket with a fogged bottle. Giles, it's so beautiful," Emily said, mesmerized. He handed her a glass of wine and smiled. She accepted it gratefully and stepped closer to the edge, safely protected by the parapet. The view was breathtaking. There were at least 70 stories below them. It was as if they were looking at the world through God's eyes. "I knew you'd like it." "Have some wine," Giles said, looking directly into her eyes. It was impossible to look away from that smile, from that delighted face. The surprise had really worked. "Now look up," he suggested. His chosen one immediately raised her head. Her eyes reflected the entire visible cosmos at that moment. "Sometimes it seems like the world is made up of 1,000 stars," Giles said. "Those lights reflecting light are the stars, and our world is an arc among them." They looked out into the endless sky for a long time. This is where they kissed for the first time after the most magical evening of her life. "I thought you were just like the other rich guys, taking girls to restaurants to get them into bed quickly, and then dumping them when they're not needed. But a date on the roof of a skyscraper? I'd never done that before." "I'm glad I could please you," Emily said. Honey, Giles leaned over and kissed her tenderly. Garrett's voice suddenly snapped him out of those happy memories. "So why is it pointless to go to Japan?" It was as if Giles had woken up from the most marvelous dream. Reality unsettled him. How he wished he could stay in this unforgettable evening forever. And now he had to decide alone how best to help their daughter. Oh, if only Emily were here. "I don't think they can help us there," he said aloud. "Japan is a developed country, no doubt. But Germany is no different in its medical professionalism. But it's better to do everything possible than to do nothing and regret it all your life. Let him fail, but at least he will try. Or did they have other options to help this baby?" Giles thought for a moment, then answered. "You know, you very often give good food for thought. But I don't intend to think now. I must act." There was a moment's silence, and then Giles broke it again. "We're going to Japan," he said firmly. It was a small country with an amazing climate, beautiful mountains of cherry blossoms, and clear, fragrant air. Giles would have enjoyed traveling through this enchanting land had he not come here alone, widowed and lonely, determined to cure his only daughter. A doctor examined little Eva on the first day. This private hospital offered to do the impossible to heal hands that were completely devoid of movement. But even here, Giles already suspected something was wrong. In Germany, he had been promised the same thing, the same miracle. But it had all turned out to be nothing more than a beautiful advertising cover and wasted time. There was no risk. Eva was just coming out of a leg operation that had not brought any results. And now, if this operation was unsuccessful, the girl's health would deteriorate significantly. After all, she was still a baby. This little girl was only 2 months old, and she had already experienced something that few adults can endure. These children's health is always fragile, and any surgical intervention could be fatal. But Giles decided to take the risk. Until the last moment, he believed that something might work in the end. These weren't some shamans promising to cure you with incantations and rituals. These were highly qualified doctors, the best of the best. Japan's medicine is widely regarded as one of the most advanced in the entire world. Giles and his daughter were put in a private room. It was very cozily furnished, all decorated in a modern style and at the same time with a touch of national culture. Large panoramic windows, a soft carpet, a rest area with a sofa, a coffee table and tatami. There was a large flat-screen TV and even a mini bar, but Giles found it inappropriate. How could he have fun, drink alcohol and watch TV while his poor little daughter was undergoing a complicated operation? After the operation in Germany, EVA began to sleep more often. Doctors explained it by the fact that she suffered terrible stress. And of course it affected her body and her sleep schedule. The baby often cried. Her father tried to calm her down by cradling her for hours, but she would not calm down. "Mommy would probably know how to calm you down," Giles said sadly, rocking the baby in his arms. She'd been cranky half the night and seemed exhausted. She was taken away in the morning. Giles prayed to God, something he'd never done before. He kissed Emily's pendant, which was always with him, and stared out the window for long periods of time. At about 3 p.m., the door opened and a girl was wheeled into the room on a small gurney. As Giles expected, his daughter was unconscious. The paramedics entered, said something in their own language, made calming gestures, and left. They were followed by the doctor who had performed the operation, a tired-looking Japanese man who spoke good international English. "We're doing well," he said to Giles. "I understand you're anxious as a father." He smiled and folded his hands in front of him, even bowing slightly in deference. "The operation was a success. Your daughter is still sleeping, but she will wake up very soon. There will be a doctor on duty in the room 24 hours a day. This is necessary to monitor the condition of our little patient." The exhausted father hurried to take a quick look at his treasure. Her arms were framed by 2 plastic bracelets, in which some tubes were inserted at special places. The young doctor who remained in the room smiled cordially at Giles and kept filling out paperwork. The minutes dragged on for what seemed like an eternity. Giles asked the coordinator how long he had to wait, and when he got an answer, he decided that he could visit the head doctor before Eve woke up. "Come in," said a steady voice as there was a knock on the door. Giles stepped into the huge, luxurious office. He was immediately confronted by the head doctor himself at his desk. At the back was a full-height painting of the main symbol of Japan, the sakura tree. It was hard not to recognize that this painting did have some sort of calming effect. "It's about my daughter Amber," Giles said from the doorway. The doctor looked at the man carefully, then pointed to a low chair. He sat down. The doctor flipped through his many papers and then looked at Giles. "Your daughter?" "She had surgery today," he said calmly. He really did have a lot of clients, and it was impossible to remember them all. That was why Giles was receptive to a start like this. Amber Johnson, the head of the clinic, said again. Giles nodded affirmatively. "Well, she had a successful operation. She should be under observation for 3 days. After a full examination of the results, we'll decide what to do next." "What are the chances of success?" "Chances?" the doctor asked in bewilderment. "I mean, are you sure that you can help my daughter? That her hands will be able to function?" "Listen," the doctor began seriously and even got up from his desk. He walked around his workstation and sat across from the man in another chair, spreading his legs and crossing his arms. "No surgery can give a complete guarantee that the problem will completely disappear. Pardon the comparison. But even the disinfectant packaging says it only kills 99% of bacteria. It doesn't kill 100. You know what I'm saying? We can't make any exact guarantees. People are always unsure about things. But it's not our fault. It's the way the world works. It's the way the world works. It's the Creator's fault, if you will. He created a world where there are many assumptions and errors, where it is completely randomly determined who will die today and who will live. I just want to assure you that my experience is very long, and my practice helps a lot of people. But if there is no return from you, what return are you talking about? More money, you can have it today. Just help me." Giles begged. "Hear me." The doctor couldn't take it anymore. "I don't want your money. If life were free, I'd perform these surgeries for free. My goal is to help people, not to get more money in my wallet." "Does your daughter need support?" She may be small, but she's not just small, she's only a couple months old, Giles interrupted. She may be small, the doctor persisted, but that's the age at which children feel everything emotionally, take in information from their surroundings, from sounds, from surroundings, from people around them. That is why I want her to feel your presence. She should realize that you are near. After all, it is not only physical factors that influence our condition. Emotions also help us to live. Is this where you are right now? What do you mean? Giles didn't understand. In your office, of course. But you should be at your little girl's bedside, supporting her, being there for her, you know. I understand, Dr. Giles summed up, thanked the doctor dryly, and left the office. It was as if his world had just been turned upside down. No, it wasn't. He just hadn't expected to be given such a lecture. At first he was skeptical of this advice. But the subsequent events completely confirmed the doctor's words. A few hours after that conversation, Giles was sitting in the room next to Amber's crib, drinking coffee and absent-mindedly reading his book. Suddenly a tune came into his head, and he began to hum it. Suddenly he heard a sound that sounded like a contented laugh. It was Amber waking up, which seemed strange to him, since she had been crying since the surgery. It was understandable the girl was not even strong yet, and she had already been taken to different doctors, interfering with her tiny body, cutting and picking with surgical instruments. Many adults would have fallen into a prolonged depression at that. So Giles cautiously put the book aside and peered into the glass-rimmed crib. His daughter was lying on the headboard, head turned toward him, dragging her thumbs, smiling. "What cheered you up so much?" affectionately asked her father. "Maybe your yellow bee? Yes, do you like it?" He lightly touched the toy hanging over the crib. It wobbled and made a low, melodious tinkling sound, but the girl didn't even turn her head in its direction. "What cheered you up?" "Amber." Her father naively asked her again, this time in English, and showed her the other toys. Amber didn't answer her father, of course, but the faint smile was gone from her face. Giles was very upset by this fact. He had just seen his daughter's first conscious smile, and even something that looked like laughter. And now there was an indifferent expression on her face again. Giles came the voice of the doctor on duty to the resident. At this time he was tactfully in another part of the large room, so as not to interfere with the communication between father and child. "Did you want something?" Giles answered him politely. "Yes, if I may." The doctor stepped closer. Your daughter was amused by a song." "A song?" the father questioned incredulously. Yes, the resident nodded, a happy smile playing on his face. "Children really like to have songs sung to them." "Sing her another one." Giles shrugged his own shoulders. He had heard the tune quite unknowingly. It seemed that the first time he had heard it with Emily was when they were walking in a big, beautiful park on some romantic date. And then Emily again. The man tried to chase away his thoughts of her, but every little thing reminded him of her eyes, her lips, her hair. To say the least, little Amber looked an awful lot like her mother. Especially her big eyes, but she looked just like Emily. Giles sat back in his chair and hummed that simple tune again. Suddenly he heard a sound like muffled laughter again. He fell silent and listened, fearing that it was all just in his head. No, it was really happening. Little Amber was actually smiling quite contentedly and trying to laugh. Again, it was unclear what it was about. Giles moved closer to his daughter and watched her closely. He hummed the song to her once more and smiled, and he tickled her tummy with his finger. Amber broke out into a happy, toothless smile again and let out her agoo, 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 agoo laugh. "How do you like that song?" Giles asked her gently. The girl, as if understanding him, smiled again. It was then that the true meaning of his recent conversation with the doctor in charge of the clinic came to him. This is what he meant when he said to support the child emotionally. Little children really do feel everything. That was a real revelation to Giles. In the days that followed, all sorts of things happened. It was painful and difficult, but that was the way the attentive father soothed his tiny daughter every time. When she began to cry, Giles would play the music on his phone and often hum it himself, soothing and lulling her to sleep. Then she would fall asleep very quickly. Who knew Giles thought that a child could be soothed by the favorite song of its departed mother? On the third day, an entourage of doctors came to the room, headed by an emotional contact advocate Giles already knew. It was time to check on Amber's condition. A host of doctors surrounded the girl's crib, and the father was asked to stand aside. For minutes that seemed like an eternity to Giles, they stayed with Amber, talking among themselves, writing in their notebooks, poking at the tablets they'd brought, and then they were all out the door. Before Giles knew it, the room was completely empty, and he was once again in the dark about his daughter, about her hands, about what to do next. He felt his own hands treacherously trembling. But after a couple minutes, the head doctor entered the room again. He was holding a clipboard and kept writing something down, walking towards Giles. So he began seriously, adjusting his glasses and looking at the notes. With our little hands, everything is as it should be. More accurately, of course, it could be better, but in a way, Giles said indignantly. I mean, it's a baby for her hands. That's fine, the doctor replied calmly. They did respond with the necessary reaction. Now, there are a few more important procedures that need to be done. What kind? We will apply a weak electric current of a certain frequency, and we will also apply some of the know-how of our clinic. You'll see for yourself. I vouch it's safe, but you'll have to stay here for another month. A month, Giles shrieked. He certainly hadn't expected such a long gap. He just wasted that month last time. Hush, hush. You're scaring your child, the doctor soothed. Why react like that? Time, doctor. I have very little of it, and if nothing succeeds and everything fails, I have until 6 months to do everything I can for her. I assure you that everything will be all right. The result is already there, and you can see for yourself. With those words, the surgeon walked over to the crib where Amber slept and beckoned Giles over to him. The man approached, looking at the doctor incredulously, but in the meantime he took the girl's tiny hand and forcefully pulled on her middle finger, for which he received a very negative reaction from her father. "What are you doing?" he whispered, but the surgeon wasn't listening. He ahed and gestured for Giles to observe. Suddenly the girl's hand trembled faintly and squeezed the doctor's finger. Giles was amazed. Had he really chosen the right clinic? And it hadn't all been for nothing? "Try it yourself," the doctor suggested. Giles carefully lowered his hand and placed his finger in the girl's palm. He quietly tugged on her middle finger and actually felt the response. Amber was able to do it again. "Oh my God, it's working. It's working, doctor. Please heal her feet too with the same technique." "I'll pay any money," Giles exclaimed, shaking the doctor's hands forcefully. But after that, the surgeon's face darkened. He shook his head from side to side. "I'm afraid it's impossible," he declared decisively. "Arms and legs are arranged quite differently. And there is no technology yet that can make them mobile with this diagnosis. Even if we amputate them and put artificial ones, they won't work simply because the brain doesn't receive information about the existence of this organ. That's a better explanation. So it's the same as if you wanted to see with your finger. You can't do that, they've completely atrophied. But you've helped your hands. The hands are different. They weren't completely disconnected from the nervous system. I'm a neurosurgeon, Mr. Giles. I'm a highly experienced surgeon myself, and I know what I'm talking about. We've done a lot of research on this subject. If there's the slightest chance of recovery, I do everything I can, and as you can see, I'm good at it." "So Amber will never walk again," Giles said, staring into the void in despair. It was as if his mind was in another dimension. He was trying to find the answer to why this had happened to his child. After all, he could afford everything with his money. He couldn't accept the diagnosis. Then he felt a warm hand on his shoulder. "I know it's hard for you to accept, but you can live a full life with this illness. Will you give her a good education? She'll be able to do things with her hands. Life is not all about walking, believe me." The next few days went by much like the last. Amber was recovering from surgery, but now she had real needles inserted into her arms every day. Medical needles, of course. They were very thin and long. As the doctor explained, it didn't hurt at all. The girl felt nothing. They were so thin that they had the sole function of pressing certain points in the nerve endings. It was a common practice in Japan. Indeed, it has been scientifically proven that there are certain points in the human body acting on which it is possible to cure such an ailment. The procedure lasted for months. At the end of this therapy, the result was obvious. Amber could move her arm completely. She picked up toys, squeezed balls, did various exercises, and by the end of the course, her hands were fully functional. My father cried with happiness. He took an active part to achieve such a result, sat with her all day long, did special exercises, sang her songs, read books, fed her from a bottle, and said 100 times a day that she was the most favorite and the best girl in the world. So it was not only the doctor's merit. After a month, they were finally able to fly home to New York. Giles now devoted his life to his daughter. He had entrusted most of his business responsibilities to a trusted assistant. Now, almost all of his time belonged to Amber. Of course, there were times when business required his personal presence. It was only on those occasions that Giles invited a caregiver. It was quite rare. The man really spent a huge amount of time with his daughter, stayed up nights, got up at every rustle, read a lot of books on how to take care of an infant. He took walks with his treasure every day and occasionally even went out on the town to let the baby socialize. Sometimes single moms would pester him. "Oh, what a cute little girl you have," exclaimed a mother, also walking with a stroller. "Yes, she looks just like her mom," replied Giles proudly. "Where's your mommy, sweetie?" Amber's mom peeked in the stroller. "Her mother passed away," Giles answered firmly, and drove away from the annoying mom. Women like that had a light bulb in their eyes that turned on with joy. Whether it was because of the latest iPhone in their young father's hands, his expensive watch and clothes, or because they were desperate to find a life partner. But Giles never gave in to such provocations. He and Amber had been stalked by one such restless lady. "Oh, I'm sorry, I just kicked you out again out of the blue." "Get out slowly," said the woman they'd parted with on a rather dry note. Giles had gone in the opposite direction about 15 minutes ago, but she was here again. "You're in a hurry," Giles replied with a chuckle, quickening his pace. But the woman stuck to him like gum. "We walk a lot," she counted happily. "The baby needs to be out in the fresh air more." "Oh, what's this?" "I haven't even introduced myself. Martha, do I know you?" The woman held out her hand. Giles didn't even look at her, just murmured, "That's a beautiful name." The mother obviously didn't take the hint and kept on prying. "What's your name?" "I'm on my way to..." By the age of 7, Amber was very developed intellectually. A large part of her world was made up of books. Here, in this magical world, anything was possible, and she didn't need real legs. Sometimes little children would run up to her on the street and ask her what kind of car she was sitting on. Her customized wheelchair really did look like a mini spaceship. The children asked to ride in it, but the girl explained to them that it was her personal throne for Princess Amber only. She was not offended in the least by such attention from passers-by. She was well aware that she was not like ordinary children, but thanks to her father's efforts, she always considered it her highlight. Unfortunately, such gentle comments from children about her physical condition were short-lived. When Amber turned 7, the issue of school became acute. Secondary education, after all, had to be obtained, and after it in profile and higher education. At first, her father offered her homeschooling, then in a specialized school for children with disabilities, like herself, and got a real scandal from his favorite daughter. "I want to study in a regular school," she said. "Daddy, I don't want to feel inferior. Put me in a regular school." "Well," thought the father, "I guess you're right. There'll be no separation between regular people and handicapped people. Honey, you'll have to compete with all kinds of people, and most of them will have more physical abilities than you. It doesn't make you worse at all, but they will always have that advantage. It's a cruel world, Amber. It's best for you if you realize that as early as possible." September 1st came. Before that, Giles had taken Amber shopping for a long time so she could pick out something she liked. In the end, they settled on a simple blue dress with a white apron, the classic look. Giles took Amber to a good hairdresser. She got a beautiful hairdo of long, shiny hair. They hung the backpack on a special hook on her wheelchair, and with great joy Amber went with her father to her first real school. The girl was terribly nervous before the very first day of school. Her hands were sweating and trembling, and in her eyes, despite all the joy, fear lingered. "Hey, honey," her dad called out to her as they rode in the car. "It's going to be okay. I assure you, you're smarter than all the kids in this class. Everyone's going to like you right away. You'll see." "Well, cheer up." The girl looked at him and smiled, but continued to be nervous. Her father put the entire lineup near her, and when the children began to be brought into the school, left. Of course, the class teacher had been warned in advance about the girl's health. Giles went back to the car and waited. He was so tired from this past week. Too many nerves had been spent. The endless choice of clothes, whims, tears, parent-teacher conferences, how could ordinary women bear it all? The exhausted father didn't even notice he'd fallen asleep, stretched out on the seat. It wasn't the melodious sounds that woke Giles, not from birdsong. He was startled awake by the loud slamming of the driver's door, followed by Garrett's loud screams. "Wait, Amber! Amber!" he shouted. Giles whirled out of the cabin and ran to find out what had happened. The first thing he saw was his security driver running across the schoolyard behind Amber's wheelchair. "Garrett, what happened?" Giles shouted. An eerie roar erupted from the chair, which had stopped in the middle of the schoolyard. In fact, Amber was having a horrible tantrum. Barely had she signed in. The driver tried to explain. "Come on." Giles couldn't take it anymore. "I don't understand anything." She pulled up to the car, ordered him to put her in and drive away. She suddenly burst into tears and ran off in the opposite direction. Suddenly she was so hysterical. Alarmed, the father cautiously approached the chair. "Honey, what happened to you?" As sympathetically as possible, he asked. The girl immediately stopped crying and remained silent. Her father was afraid to say another word. This oppressive silence strained him even more than the terrible tears. Pauline would certainly have found the right words, he thought with despair. "Nothing," replied the daughter firmly, sharply. Then the father went around the chair and sat down opposite Amber. That way their faces were side by side. "Honey, I'm your daddy, and I want to help you," Giles began gently. "If you wanted to help me, you wouldn't have put me in that school with those toxic kids." Amber blurted out. "What did they do?" The man began to suspect something wrong. They. Amber couldn't speak. Her words were lost in tears, and she stuttered with emotion. Then Giles walked over to his little girl and hugged her as tightly as he could. "Daddy," the girl cried into her father's sweater. "They're not so bad, Daddy. All people are cruel at times. Honey, my poor little girl. They said that since I had no legs, I was a robot. They said I wasn't human, Daddy. And then they started taking my chair apart. They were stopped by the teacher, who noticed it when she came into the classroom." "You had a teacher walking away from you," Giles said indignantly. "She said she had to leave right away on business. And them, Dad, they're like animals. I tried to explain to them that you don't have to do that I need a wheelchair, and they said it takes more confirmation to confirm that I'm not a robot, and I need to get up off this thing. I hate them." The last phrase she just shouted. It was a real cry of the soul. Her father calmed her down for a very long time, even when she was already home, and finally able to put her to bed. After closing the door, he headed for his office. On the way, he met Garrett. "I'm going to go see that teacher tomorrow. Have her fired for such irresponsibility," he said menacingly to the guard. The guard nodded understandingly. He felt sorry for Amber himself. It wasn't her fault that the kids were so cruel. The next day, Giles talked to the class teacher. She was very apologetic about her fault and begged him not to write a complaint to the management, arguing that she had a small salary and was barely making ends meet. But the man did not care. His daughter was in a terrible state, but he had spent so long preparing her for school. She was so eager to learn new things, and now all motivation to learn had evaporated. That same day, he wrote a huge complaint to the management. It reached the Ministry of Education. Of course, they took action, given the personality of the complainers, and by evening this teacher was scandalously dismissed. Satisfied with this case, Giles got into his car and drove home to announce the wonderful news to Amber. "Maybe we shouldn't have fired the teacher. What if she can't find a job anymore?" Garrett pronounced, driving the car. "So she shouldn't have left the class when they first started getting to know each other. What doesn't she know about child psychology or something?" "But, by golly," indifferently replied Giles, looking at the phone. "Honey, Daddy's got a surprise for you," the man announced, having just crossed the threshold of the apartment. A wheelchair slowly pulled out of the nursery. The little girl was still very upset about yesterday's situation. She had been sitting in her room all day reading a book. Giles walked over to his daughter and handed her some kind of envelope. "What's this?" perplexed, Amber asked. "Open it, you'll find out." The girl scrutinized the envelope. It was bright yellow in color and had flowers drawn on the edges. She couldn't wait to open it. So once again, with a glance at her father, she resolutely opened it. In it, she found a doubled folded piece of paper. She unfolded it intrigued and read aloud. "Dear Amber, we know you're in a very bad mood right now, and our team wants to improve it. We invite you to the delightful Hawaii. Here you can bask in the sunshine, enjoy delicious cocktails, and completely relax at our lake center." She set the sheet aside and looked at Daddy. He was waiting for her reaction. "We're going on vacation to Hawaii," Amber exclaimed, already in high spirits. "That's right, honey, we are, aren't we?" But then the girl immediately stammered and lowered her head. Her mood had soured again. "What about school? After all, I have to study. I'm missing the whole first week, it turns out. Honey, you know more than these kids 2 years ahead of you. You can afford to rest. They've done a terrible thing to you. But I expect an answer by tomorrow," Giles said and left for his office, leaving the girl in doubt. But his plan worked wonderfully, and the very next day at breakfast she announced that she had definitely decided to go there. "It's going to be quite a trip. I'll be like the characters in my book," she enthused. Giles watched Amber's happy face, and he didn't need anything else. Hawaii greeted them with tropical emptiness, pristine sandy beaches, and unrivaled views of the Arabian Sea. Here stretched a veritable resort paradise. Their suite occupied an entire floor and overlooked a secluded corner of the beach. It was a wonderful addition. "I hope you enjoy our company," the maid said, glanced playfully at Giles, and left. As Amber began to look at the beauty of the room, her father praised himself. He wanted to cheer his daughter up so badly that he'd made up a company that was giving away a trip to Hawaii. Giles knew she had always dreamed of going here. She'd read tons of books about this place. Daddy, it's like I'm the heroine of a book. I want to go to the beach already, please," Amber exclaimed. "Honey, we'll go tomorrow. Today you need to rest after your flight, and tonight you'll get a massage," intriguingly declared the father. "A massage?" Amber was upset, pouted her lips, as if I didn't have enough of that at home. "Bunny, it's an authentic Hawaiian massage. It's done according to ancient techniques. It's such an ancient teaching. Our hotel has the largest wellness center in all of Hawaii." "I know what a massage is," said Amber, a well-read girl of no age. Yeah, it's all here for you. But first we need to rest." And that was that. The next day, Amber finally made it to the Arabian Sea beach. It was her blue dream. She'd never seen this sea before, and this golden sand that she lowered her feet into, not feeling its warmth, but with her hands she could feel all its softness. She sat under an umbrella and read a new book. Her father had gone for a little swim in the pleasant seawater, leaving the girl in the care of the faithful Garrett. He was dozing on his chaise long after his third cocktail, and not just lemonade. Some rustling was heard from behind. The girl turned around. A very unkempt, bearded old man was staring at her. He was squatting down to level with her, just like her daddy used to do when he wanted to have a serious talk with her. "Hello, who are you?" Amber asked. But the old man didn't answer. He looked at the girl in silence for a long time. After a couple of minutes, she realized that it was some local madman, and she was scared. Traitorous, cold goosebumps crept up her spine. Garrett. Amber took a chance and wanted to shout louder. Suddenly, she felt a warm hand on her head. She didn't have time to think of anything, but there was a terrifying pain in her back, from which the girl screamed terribly. It was comparable to a huge needle, which entered directly into the center of the spine, as if this stranger pressed on some painful point. At her screams, some people from the hotel immediately came running. The sleepy Garrett jumped off his lounger, and her father came rushing in from the water. "What are you doing, you bastard?" Giles shouted at the bearded man. The man remained silent. He seemed to understand only his own language. International English was unknown to him, but despite the commotion and Amber's shouts, the bearded man didn't move an inch away from her. Giles wanted to pounce on him, but he couldn't even move. Then he yelled as hard as he could. "Garrett, why are you standing there like that? What am I paying you for?" But the guard couldn't move a finger. It was very strange, as if they'd all gone into a stupor. Finally, Giles felt like he could move again. He shoved the stranger, and he fell backward, screaming in pain. "Get out. You don't belong here, you pervert," shouted Amber's father in a rage. The man stood up, shaking off the sand. He gave Giles a reproachful look and walked away. Giles immediately ran over to his girl, who was already silent and only flapping her eyes in bewilderment. In front of the fleeing hotel employee was a fidgety, apologizing woman in a hurry. "We apologize. We will not allow anyone else to enter the hotel." "Try as you might," Giles said menacingly, glaring at Amber. "We came here to get rid of stress, not to add to it." The next morning proved to be magical. "Honey, get up. You were supposed to be at the beach early in the morning," Giles began, but he stopped short. A very strange scene was unfolding before him. Amber was asleep in her bed, but part of her leg was sticking out from under the covers. However, it wasn't even about the leg itself. The girl wiggled her toes in her sleep. The doctors had said that her legs were completely non-viable. Giles was so stunned that he almost fainted. Amber. Amber. He woke his daughter, shaking her as hard as he could. The girl finally opened her eyes. "Well, Dad, can I go to the beach later? I have a headache." "Amber. Amber, your legs? Look at them." Only the girl immediately caught the panic in her father's words and looked at her feet. They were just like normal. "What's wrong with your feet?" Amber replied cleanly. Laying down again, she was about to fall asleep when her father woke her up again. "Hey, get up, sleepyhead. I need to know what's wrong with you right away." The girl's face contorted with anger. She didn't wake her father when he had a headache, but now she had to obey. "Sit down," her father sternly ordered her and helped her up. The girl complied with the request. "Now, try to wiggle your toes," Giles said. Amber looked at him like he was crazy. "Dad, did you fall off a palm tree yesterday? What toes?" And then, quite suddenly, her toes started moving again. She herself was shocked at what she felt. Amber tried to move her toes herself, and oh, miracle, it worked. They actually obeyed her. How could that be possible? The girl didn't understand. "Where's that tramp?" Giles panicked, jumping up and running around the room. "You chased him away," honey, Amber replied, rubbing her eyes. She thought she was dreaming, but it was true. Yesterday, Giles had thought the bearded stranger was some kind of maniac who didn't speak English. Amber's complaints of terrible back pain were attributed to simple fear. There were no signs of violence on her body. But now a murderous and very strange thought occurred to Giles. What if that bearded brat had helped his Amber? If he'd made the miracle happen, they'd have to find the tramp. He was probably wandering somewhere, and Giles could offer him any amount of money he wanted. He'd have enough to last him a lifetime, and he'd have an inheritance. He ran to ask about the tramp to the front desk, to the hotel guests, to anyone he could find, but people just shrugged their shoulders. Finally, one of the servants directed him to the local market. That's where everyone knows. Maybe a fat Hawaiian woman who tended the plants outside their room told him. Encouraged, the father went to the market. There, it was indeed revealed that this wanderlusting wizard is a hermit. He has no home of his own. His home is all of Hawaii. He helps the poor, cures diseases. Basically, everyone honors him. If a saint turns his attention to someone, they're considered lucky to have been favored by the gods. Only now did Giles realize what a terrible mistake he'd made in banishing this miracle worker. Where could he find him now? In a very bad mood, the man returned to the room. Going into his daughter's room, he saw her scrutinizing her toes. They were still moving. It was the truest of miracles for them, something they had thought impossible all their lives. Giles had already resigned himself to his Amber's fate. Turns out there was someone on Earth who could actually help her. The next day he went to town again, trying to find out where this sorcerer who could help him might have gone. But no matter how much money he named, people refused to give his whereabouts. They simply did not know where this mysterious garden Hugh with the long and unkempt beard could be hiding. The vacation had to be extended for another week. Giles didn't want to give up when he was so close to a clue. He put all his connections into the search, but nothing yielded results. One day, however, a note was slipped into his room. The paper was old, yellow and dirty. It was written in scrawled handwriting in broken English. If you do 5 good deeds, your daughter Amber will get well. There was no signature. Giles knew at once that it was a message from the hermit. But what did it mean? 5 good deeds. This is life, not a fairy tale. But Giles saw no other way out. If there was a chance, this was it. He had to fulfill the condition. Of course, the first thing he did was to donate a huge sum to charities and give away even more money to the needy. That was the easiest thing he could do. Next, the man decided to do a noble deed. He paid for a complicated surgery for a girl dying of cancer. He really hoped that this help would not be in vain. However, his daughter Amber gave him one thought. Dad, you should do 5 good deeds. But why are all your ideas just about money? It was a smart and profound thought. Amber was right. You can do good things with more than just money. Then Giles decided to help a charity that helped poor children in Hawaii. Their job was to give free food to the poor. Giles became directly involved. At first he was very reluctant to participate. He was used to paying for work, not doing it. But Amber encouraged him by reminding him what he was doing it for. It wasn't as hard as he expected. He'd fed a lot of hungry kids all day. Giles himself felt warm after such a deed. And it was the 3rd. The 4th good deed was completely spontaneous. The poor girl who worked at the hotel was carrying a visitor's heavy suitcases up to the 3rd floor. Of course, Giles could not pass it by. There was no self-serving purpose here, just good parenting. Amber watched everything from around the corner. When her father returned to the room, she applauded him. She was really proud of her dad today. His last good deed didn't work out so well. He didn't know what else he could think of to make this old man realize that Giles had accomplished the mission. Discussing the problem with the faithful Garrett, he suggested, so you fired poor teacher Amber. I think it would be a very kind thing to reinstate her. Giles didn't immediately accept the suggestion, but on reflection he realized that Garrett was right. The teacher had not been so wronged. He asked his men to look into it, and within a week his request had been honored. The teacher had been reinstated, and then, at Giles's request, the management had paid her compensation for the temporary loss of her job. Of course, that was his doing, too. When the teacher found out, she thanked him for a long time, and he was embarrassed by her calls and messages. That was it. One evening, Amber, sitting in her stroller and looking at the stars out the panoramic window, said to her father, "Daddy, you're doing such a great job. I'm so glad you've corrected your mistakes." "Thank you, honey. I do all of this for you. More importantly, I do it with really sincere motives. I love helping people, but I often forget how important it is, and sometimes I need that reminder. You know, my dear, I even began to feel better, as if my soul has been aching all my life, and now it has calmed down." "That's the sins gone out of you," the girl explained. He. "Maybe so, honey. Maybe so," the man said thoughtfully, looking up into the vast night sky. The next day was very chilly. The weather was not happy at all. There was a storm in Hawaii, and soon it was pouring rain. Amber and Giles decided to spend the day in the room. "It's your turn," his father announced. "Why is the pawn so useless? All you can do is eat it and whimper." Amber is a pawn for sure and useless. Sometimes she is stronger than all the other pieces. For example, at first no one may notice her, but once she sneaks up on the king, that's when everyone gets scared. "So I can win with a pawn?" "Yeah, but don't tell anyone you have big plans for her. Everyone has to think it doesn't matter to you." An hour passed, and finally Amber had the upper hand. "Dad, I won, and I won." Giles made a sad grimace on his face, but the girl realized it was all a joke and laughed loudly. Suddenly they heard the sound of thunder. Giles was frightened for a second, because the sound was so powerful. A second later, a blinding bolt of lightning flashed. But this time it wasn't the flash of light that startled him. It was his daughter's shrill scream. He turned around and saw the tramp with the long beard and the bamboo cane. He had come here unnoticed, as if he had been brought by the Hindu gods themselves. "You have fulfilled your condition," said the hermit in a voice. "Now it's my turn to fulfill mine." Giles was amazed that the man now spoke English, as if it were his native tongue. He was European in appearance, except for his beard, which was terribly scruffy. Otherwise, he was like the rest of the South Asians. Giles couldn't see his features closely, for the light had gone out immediately after the lightning flash, and the room had gone dark. "What is your name?" Giles asked, to which he received only an approving look from the man. The stranger approached Amber and touched her forehead. Giles protested at first, but then reassured himself that the man would do no harm, as he had already seen for himself. "Can you help her?" his father asked after a while. "She's a little girl." "Of course she can be helped," the tramp mumbled affectionately. "How much do I owe you?" "I don't take money. The only condition is that you must not interfere with the treatment to deprive you of any desire to find the girl. You will not know the location of the convent where I will take her. You will be forbidden to communicate until she is completely cured." "How long will that take?" "I cannot know anything for certain. The Almighty and the gods will decide." The hermit raised his hands to the sky. "I am only suggesting, can you agree or not?" "It could take years." Giles wondered. "I suppose so," the old man agreed. "But for my daughter's sake, I think it's worth the risk. You'd think I'd have to pick her up today. I'll give you an hour with her. Make up your mind and say goodbye." The man left the room, leaving Amber and her father alone. "Dad, are you really going to give me to this strange man?" worried daughter. "Honey, it's up to you. But think about it. You'll be able to walk, live like a healthy person. But why should I do that if I may never see you again? We'll meet again someday, and then you'll be completely healthy. I believe that. I had a dream about your mom, Amber, today. She said I should let you go." Giles nodded his head. Amber was silent. She never argued with her father. He'd always been right, which meant he wanted what was best for her now. "Okay," she finally answered. The wandering healer didn't have to be called back. He'd come back on his own as soon as they'd made their decision. Giles hoped they would see their daughter soon and be happy. He comforted Amber as he said goodbye, the girl beginning to cry from overfeeling. Giles stroked her delicate hands one last time and kissed her forehead. It was very reminiscent of Emily's farewell, when the loving couple had already guessed that they wouldn't meet again. However, The man hoped that he would not lose his daughter forever. She was the only living memory of his wife, her blood. Giles decided to give the girl one thing as a parting gift. He put the very same pendant on her. "What is it?" the daughter asked through her tears. "It's your mother's pendant. I gave it to her once because I loved her so much. Now it's yours. Your mother believed it brought good luck. Keep it safe." The girl scrutinized the goldfish with emerald eyes. "It's like a fairy tale about a fisherman and a fish," she said. "Yes, dear. The magic fish is yours now." Giles wept. To his surprise, the door was quickly opened. An elderly man with a long gray beard came out with a torch in his hand. "Who has disturbed me?" he said in English. Giles had studied the language before this trip, and now he could explain himself a little. "I have come to see the head abbot of the monastery. I want to be treated here. I've been looking for you for a long time." The elder looked at the man incredulously at first. "Are you sure you need help?" he asked. "Yes, very much," Giles answered. He was led inside. The first thing Giles saw was a large garden. Despite the cold outside and the snow in some places, there were flowers and fruit trees. People in coarse, woven robes strolled about. They all seemed overly happy to Giles, as if they'd been drugged. They wandered around the garden, gazing at the trees and flowers, visibly happy to be alive. Some of them were in wheelchairs, some of them limping. One boy had a head injury. Giles assumed he had cancer. As he looked closer, he realized no one here was using drugs. All these people were experiencing what he called enlightenment. The attendants had asked him to wait here, so Giles sat down on a roughly made bench. One of the monks approached him. "Who are you?" he asked penetratingly and laid his hand on Giles' head. "No one yet," Giles said thoughtfully. Apparently these trees of unnatural green had a very calming effect. Everything in this garden seemed incredibly mesmerizing to him. It was a very unusual feeling. Each one of us is an incarnation of the great Brahma. We are only at the beginning of the path, and we have to find ourselves. That is what our teacher says, the monk explained. "What else does he tell you?" Giles remembered why he had come here when the old man removed his hand from his head, but there was no answer to that question. Another elder approached them and invited them to go into the monastery room. They walked for a long time along a long corridor, turning left and right. Finally, the elder stopped at one of the rooms and opened the door. "Wait here for the teacher while you have our tea," he explained and left. Giles entered the mysterious room. There was almost no furniture except for a low table and 2 mats lying on the floor. The servant brought tea. Giles drank it, and it was delicious. Now he had to act. He didn't wait for the teacher to arrive and went back out into the corridor. As he opened the doors, he saw halls, cells, something that looked like a dining hall, but the teacher was nowhere to be found. He almost got caught on the 2nd floor. When opening one of the doors, he saw through a crack a number of people in cassocks standing in a circle. If they spotted him, there would definitely be questions that he didn't have the answers to. Giles stopped in front of each room and listened. Somewhere there was a monotonous reading aloud in an unfamiliar language. Somewhere it was completely silent. Suddenly, Giles heard laughter. Amber's laughter, the kind of laughter that couldn't be confused with anything else in the world. He rushed to the other side of the long hallway as soon as he was sure the laughter was coming from one extreme room and swung the doors open. It looked like someone's bedroom was in here. There was just a giant bed standing there and a translucent canopy over it. But what he saw here horrified him. His breath caught, his hands shook. How could he have agreed to this? To give up his daughter to have something like this done to her. Amber was hanging upside down, suspended by her feet from some kind of special garter. She looked like a bat as her entire body was wrapped in a thick black cloth like a cocoon. There were a couple other people hanging next to her. Their appearance was exactly the same as Amber's, and on the bed beneath them were dark blood stains. Giles was shocked at what he saw and was about to go in and stop the outrage, but a heavy, powerful hand fell on his shoulder. He cautiously turned around. Standing before him was the same healer who had taken his daughter from him. Giles' throat went dry. He felt anger, bewilderment, and hatred all at once. Fear. "What are you doing here, Honored One?" the teacher asked menacingly. Giles felt like a little boy who'd been caught by his teacher. He was ashamed, but he felt both anger and incomprehension. "What have you done to my daughter?" Giles suddenly shouted to himself. "She doesn't recognize me." He hadn't expected himself to react in such a way. The abbot made no response, stepped away from the door, and gestured for Giles to follow him. The people they encountered bowed low to the hermit. "I'm listening to your explanations," the strange old man said calmly as he came into the back courtyard. "What's going on here?" Giles was indignant. "I have a right to know. I'm her father. What kind of barbaric methods are these? How come there's so much blood? Are you drugging her?" No, the teacher shook his head. "I am the one asking the questions here." He said it calmly and looked at Giles very carefully. It was obvious that he had a terrible restraint to listen to this kind of speech. "My methods shouldn't concern you," he said at last. "Everything you've just said is nonsense. Not one word of truth. All lies. You swore to listen to me and not to disturb her privacy. You hung my daughter by her feet." Giles wouldn't stop. "I don't know how much she weighs." "Don't you dare express yourself in a holy place," the monk frowned. "No one must see this sacrament. You've already driven God away twice, when you drove me away the first time we met, and when you entered this temple. If you care for your daughter, leave this place immediately." "I'm not leaving until I get her. Your services are no longer required. One more word, and I will curse you." Amber's father only laughed in response, but there was a disturbing thought in his soul. "Don't joke around. I want my daughter back now," Giles begged. I warned you not to interfere, but you've broken the ban. You will never see your daughter again, even when she is cured," the monk said sadly. "Farewell." He turned and walked away, and Giles was led away from the monastery by force. "I won't let it go," he shouted, banging his hands on the high gate and buttoning his down coat all the way up, and staggered downstairs, back into town. He couldn't imagine that they could take his daughter away so easily and do whatever they wanted to her. Doing experiments on her, and she was laughing, probably not realizing what they were really doing. Poor girl. She was against the idea in the first place, that drifters behind the fog. Giles didn't have to agree to such a dubious proposition. Now she had to get her out of there somehow, or they'd lose sight of her. It would be better if she kept going to school, went to university, lived like everyone else. She'd find a way to make a living out of this life, and Giles let her down. Her own father had turned her in to some dubious institution, and now he regretted it. "I'll get you out of there, girl," Giles said to himself. The words calmed him a little. Suddenly he heard a rumbling noise. It was something like distant thunder. Giles didn't realize what it was. He realized it when it was too late. A huge avalanche of snow was rolling down from the mountains. He turned around and saw the white, churning mass and realized it was all over. 15 years have passed since then. Amber made a full recovery and was finally able to stand and walk on her own legs. The years of living in the convent had changed her a lot. She became exposed to Indian culture. In her later years, all the pilgrims often went outside the temple and traveled around the country. When her teacher told her that she was completely healthy in body and mind, she left her native home. But she did not want to leave Hawaii and decided to settle in one of the cities of that state. New York was considered the most ideal city to live in Hawaii. Environmental programs were perfectly developed here. Such a clean city is rarely seen anywhere. And what were the sights here? Just look at the ancient temples. This is where Amber settled down and found her soulmate. He was a European man who, like her before, was a person with disabilities. But he had a slightly different situation. His legs were chopped off while he was working in a factory. He had to be fitted with prostheses, but it didn't interfere with his life activities at all. He felt like a full human being. He was very smart and handsome, but that wasn't why she loved him. She loved him for his kindness and honesty. Because she had been brought up in a convent, she knew a lot about true virtue, so helpfulness and openness were qualities that came first for her. She decided to dedicate her life to helping people and the environment. She constantly participated in all kinds of actions and charity events. "Honey, I'm leaving," she said, and kissed her husband. He also had a rather unusual name, Rocco. Rocco's homeland was the Czech Republic. He was in love with Russian literature and had read Tolstoy and Pushkin in his youth. At university, he studied Russian, and after an injury, he became interested in mechanics and eventually became an engineer. He was invited to work in a rapidly developing technological Indian city. It was there that he met the love of his life. Amber and Rocco were married after 3 years together and were already expecting their firstborn child this year. Amber worked for a very large conservation and preservation company, and on weekends she taught free reading classes for underprivileged children. As for her father, Amber didn't remember him at all. The last time they had seen each other had been when she was only 7 years old, and she remembered the details of their separation vaguely. And then the teacher brought the news that he had been killed in an avalanche. Amber remembered how long it had taken her to process his death. It had been a real blow to her. She couldn't eat, sleep, or go about her daily activities normally. The only close person in her life had died. She had no other relatives left. But the monks gave the girl enough support, and that helped. The monastery became her home, and its inhabitants became her family. Her father's body was never found. Amber resigned herself to the fact that she wouldn't even be able to give her own father a proper burial. And he had given her so much. All she had left of her father was a small pendant, a goldfish with emerald eyes. She had kept it all these years and still had. Someday she dreamed of passing it down to her own son or daughter. That's what she hoped for. Do you remember that tomorrow we are distributing food? I've already made a huge pot of soup, Amber said in a friendly tone. Cooking something really good on the stove. Her husband was working in his office, but that aromatic smell reached him. Rocco came into the kitchen, hugged and kissed his beloved, and sat down at the table. I remember, my dear, you're a great girl. His wife put food in his plate and served him to the table. They began to eat dinner, but then the doorbell rang. Did you invite someone? She asked Rocco. He shook his head, perplexed, then got up and went to open the door. His wife followed him. Good afternoon. The man introduced himself as a complete stranger. He was dressed very respectably, black suit, tie, glasses, perfect hair. Amber had seen them as a child. Daddy's agents often dress like this. Good afternoon. I don't think we invited anyone, Rocco said incredulously. I'm a representative of Giles Romanovich Polyansky. Does that name mean anything to you? The stranger continued. No, Rocco said, embarrassed. Yes, Amber interrupted him. It's my father. Then I'm in the right place. We've been looking for you for a long time. We would like to inform you that you are your father's heir. Therefore, you need to return to your hometown of New York to sign some documents. Rocco intervened. What documents? And you, pardon my indelicacy, who are you to Amber? She reassured the agent. He's my husband. Then we'll see you at the airport tomorrow. Here's your ticket and our card. The man held out a glossy white card. Tomorrow? Amber shrieked desperately. But we're completely busy tomorrow, and this is a matter of the utmost importance. We've lost too much time looking for you. Your father's business is hanging by a thread. Amber and Rocco looked at each other. Okay, she told the agent. I'll be on the first flight out tomorrow. He bowed and left, and the couple was left pondering. They had to find Amber's replacement. Hey, Maya, are you in New York right now? She said on the phone to her friend. Yeah. Why are you calling so late? The woman on the other end of the line answered sleepily. Here's the thing. I can't attend the event tomorrow. Help me out. What event? We're distributing food to the poor. Remember? I've already made the soup. All I have to do is pour it and give it away. Amber, you know I don't like doing stuff like this. It's easier for me to put money into it. You want me to find someone? That's what my dad used to say. But I made him do it with his own hands, and it helped him a lot. Maya, I want you to do it, not someone else. I'm begging you. I really need your help. There was silence on the other end. Fine, I'll replace you, Maya said indifferently. But Amber knew she definitely cared. She really wants to help. What's wrong? Is it an emergency? Do you have to leave? I'll tell you later, Amber said intriguingly. I found out you got married a year later, Amber. It was an accident. Okay, I have an inheritance to get. I have to go to my hometown and do the paperwork. Rocco's forbidden to tell anyone about it. So I told you in confidence. Now you're going to be a rich aunt. Oh, I see. Let me guess, you're going to donate half the money to charity. Maya. There was laughter in the phone. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. The flight to New York did not cause any inconvenience. The agent had bought a business class ticket in advance. Amber looked out the window and sang sadly. She hadn't been here in over 15 years. Here was her past life without the comforts, with the sighs, the stares of people, and the complete indifference to people like her. Amber remembered the first time she went to school, after which this whole adventure of a lifetime had happened. It made her sad to remember her father. He had given so much of himself to her, and they hadn't even gotten to say goodbye properly. Returning to her homeland brought her more sadness than joy. After arriving, she was met by the same agent. He took her to the old house where she had spent her childhood. She stood in the doorway and could not step over the threshold, as if there was an invisible wall in front of her, and if she stepped forward, her legs would fail at once. It was impossible, of course, but that was how the fear felt. She burst into tears and finally let all her long-standing feelings out, all her feelings that she'd been saving up for years, the resentment of her father, the pain of his death. It all came out through her tears. Please forgive me, Daddy, she cried right on the doorstep. It hurts so much to see this. A lump rose in her throat. The memories rolled in like waves. They battered against each other and turned into broken glass. Still, Amber managed to overpower herself and walked into the house. She walked slowly through the rooms. Everything looked so abandoned in here. No one had come in here since her father had died. There were even some old baby clothes lying around in her room that Amber had scattered when she was going on vacation. It was so strange to see. She felt like a ghost walking through the past and peering into the most secret corners of her memory. Amber picked up the bear cub from the floor and shook it from the dust, and she had loved him so much as a child. Why hadn't she taken it with her? She did not proceed to the second floor, where her father dwelt. There were strong enough emotions for the day. You never told me about your father, Rocco said into the phone when she called him. Yes, he died when I was 8. I don't remember much about him. All I know is that he wanted the best for me. I didn't always know what to do, though. What do you mean? He was throwing money around to please me. He even fired a teacher who couldn't keep up with his class. He was just showing you he loved you. No, he thought money could solve any problem, but he didn't cure my illness. I hope that taught him a lesson. I don't know what to say. He did try for me, but he didn't always remember that good and evil are boomerangs. It always comes back, and it can't be bought or redeemed with money. The next day was easier than the previous day. Amber drove to the office to sign documents. She had panicked a little on the way in, but now felt quite calm. She took a seat in the chair next to her father's desk and looked around the office. There was mahogany furniture everywhere, and portraits of some people hung around the perimeter of this room. They looked very important. She always thought it was funny that everyone who had gone to law school could boast a huge portrait of a serious person all over the wall in their office. She even chuckled at her own thoughts. Something made you laugh. The notary looked at the girl incredulously. No, I just sneezed. I'm sorry, Amber smiled. The man signed something in the papers, and after a while moved them to Amber. Please familiarize yourself with the items and then sign right here. Amber looked over the papers carefully. She was indeed passing on a huge inheritance: business shares, apartments, cars, some businesses, factories. There were no questions, and Amber signed the document. At last the matter was over and she could go home. She decided that she would ask herself what to do with everything she had received later. It was fall in Hawaii. It was the eve of the Festival of Lights. Amber and Rocco loved the festival. They always decorated their houses and put candles everywhere. Everything looked very romantic and cozy at the same time. The next day they went outside to launch sky lanterns. In the evening, according to tradition, they had to bake sweets to distribute to neighbors and clean the house. That's what the couple did the day before. Amber wore a beautiful red dress and painted her hands with henna. This holiday symbolized the victory of good over evil. That's why Amber loved it so much. In the evening, the whole town would gather by the lakes, where people would launch sky lanterns. It looked very impressive and magical. There were also a lot of tourists here. Who would want to miss such a miracle? The light from the flying lanterns was reflected in the water, and the illusion of a huge number of glowing lights was created. Then everyone went to give alms to the poor. Today there was peace and quiet, love and kindness all over the city. They walked through a fair where they sold sweets. Amber bought herself some interesting candy. It was very large and looked more like a scone, but the clerk assured her it was candy, and it really was. It was orange flavored. Amber had loved oranges since she was a little girl. Finally, they spotted an old woman sitting on the grass near the temple. She was blind and held out a change cup. Amber put a rather large amount of money in it and set it in her ear. The old lady couldn't see her, but thanked her very much for such a generous gift. Then they gave alms to a few more needy people and headed home. But even here a surprise awaited them. On the way they met a beggar who was not like the other locals. His appearance was very European. Rocco took a closer look at him. He was dirty and smelled of rotten fish. He offered to take him home to his house and help the poor guy since they had no money left. Amber dismissed the idea at first, but then agreed. After all, she had always done that, and it was all the more relevant today. They tried to call out to him, but he didn't seem to understand or hear them. Then Rocco hoisted him onto his shoulders and dragged him to his house. The man seemed completely unconcerned, as if he were unconscious. They laid him on the guest bed. His clothes stank, and he needed to be washed. But Amber decided they'd do that tomorrow. Tonight, everyone just needed to get some sleep, so they did. The next morning, Amber woke up pretty early and went into the kitchen to make coffee. She heard some rustling in the living room and remembered about last night's guest. She woke Rocco, and together, they went into the room where the vagrant was. He seemed to be very frightened. He was running from side to side like a madman. When he saw the couple, he screamed, "Who are you? Where am I? Please calm down. We just want to help you." Rocco began, but the stranger wouldn't listen. "Bandits. Let me go," he shouted. "Man, if you don't calm down right now, we'll put you out on the street. You'll rot in filth and agony again," Amber said firmly. Rocco was even surprised that she could talk so tough, and those words really worked on the man. He sat down on the floor and looked at Amber like an exhausted stray dog. "We'll get you open first," Amber stated, winking at her husband, because he would be the one doing it. Rocco poured the guest a hot bath, and when the man looked more or less human, the couple called the doctor. He examined him and said he had mental and memory problems and needed to be hospitalized. Amber agreed to pay for his treatment. She consulted with her husband, and he accepted her point of view, although not immediately. The hospitalization required a lot of money, but Amber was convinced that this man really needed help. A month later, the girl decided to visit her ward. She came to his room and sat at his bedside. She was looking at a man who was already quite healthy. He was completely different from what she saw him a month ago. It was like heaven and earth. "Good afternoon. How are you feeling?" Amber asked. The man turned to her carefully and then decided to sit on the bed so as not to embarrass the girl. After all, he was no longer sick, but just resting. "Much better. The doctor said that I once had a brain injury, so memory is very difficult to restore. So I can't tell you what happened to me, since I can't remember." "I'm glad you're on the mend," Amber smiled. "Let me ask you, what's your name?" "Does it matter? I want to know what angel came down from heaven and gave me this chance." Amber grinned. It was a very awkward compliment, but that didn't make it any less sweet. "My name is Amber. I wish I could tell you my name, too. I just don't remember it myself. I still don't understand why you care so much about me, someone you don't know. You know, I spent my entire childhood in a convent. I had no parents, and our wise teacher told me to treat the poor and destitute as if they were your own. Anyone deserves a chance, and if I have the opportunity, I will help always. You don't owe me anything. I just have to do good, because that's when humanity will not be purified. You're very lucky to have a mentor, aren't you? You're right. Too bad my father didn't learn that simple truth, and I ended up an orphan. All I have left of him is a memory. She pulled a piece out of the slit of her shirt and showed it to the man for some reason. I carry this pendant with me as a sign that anything is possible. I was able to get back on my feet, and it wouldn't have happened without my father's help, whatever he was. Him. Amber. The man suddenly shouted, his eyes rounded and his hands shook. Amber, the woman said, looking at him apprehensively. Was he really crazy after all? She had hoped he was cured. Oh my God, Amber, what are you doing? The man screamed and cried. I'm sorry, I don't understand you, she replied. She wanted to leave now, lest something bad happen. Amber, I'm Giles, your father. Honey, I'm alive, shouted the stranger. After those words, her soul went into a tizzy. She could see her own father's features in that face, all wrinkles, a terrible scar across his cheek. But all in all, it was him. How had she not recognized him as her father right away? Probably her mind had already erased his image from her mind. He was long dead to her. Papa, she exclaimed, rushing into his arms. Daddy, you're alive. And you're walking now, my girl. She cried with a happiness that shook her from the inside out. There was really no limit to this happiness. It turned out that Dad had been rescued by one of the local volunteers after that killer avalanche, but he had lost his memory and had been wandering the towns of Hawaii for years. What coincidence that they ended up in the same town on the holiday? Goodness. The boomerang always comes back. You remember that, don't you? Giles turned to his daughter. I remember it. I'll always remember it now, he answered. And so the mysterious Hawaii became a second home for both of them. And its ancient monasteries had healed a hopelessly sick girl, so that she, in turn, could help people like her father had once been, people who had lost hope and lost faith in goodness.